Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. It was around 10:30 at night, and I was somewhere between Kingston and Warsaw, not Poland, the ones in Missouri. I'd taken a detour off Highway 13 because I wanted to avoid some construction I'd hit earlier. My GPS had glitched out twice already, so I figured I'd just wing it and cut east through the back roads. I wasn't in a hurry. I'd done drives like this before. I was coming back from visiting my sister in St. Joe. Nothing out of the ordinary. I had a thermos of gas station coffee, a couple Slim Jims in the console, and the local country station cutting in and out. Weather was dry, clear sky, and just enough of a breeze to keep my windows cracked without getting eaten alive by bugs. Somewhere after my second left turn off the county road, I noticed headlights way back behind me. Just two steady dots. No brights, no flicker. Just there. I didn't think much of it at first. This road didn't have many places to pass, so I figured someone must have caught up to me and was waiting for a stretch of straightaway. I slowed a little to give them the chance, but they didn't gain. They just stayed the same distance behind me, maybe a quarter mile or so. I thought maybe it was a nervous driver, or a local who knew the roads and didn't care to rush. Fair enough. Then I came up on a bend with a wide shoulder and figured I'd just pull over, let them pass, and be done with it. I hit my blinker, slowed to a crawl, and eased off the road onto the gravel. I turned down my headlights to parking mode so I wouldn't blind them as they passed, only they didn't pass. They didn't move at all. The second I stopped, the lights behind me disappeared. Not dimmed, not turned down, gone. Just black road stretching back into the trees. I leaned forward, squinting through the rear view. Nothing. I cut my own lights fully, thinking maybe I was seeing glare. Still nothing. I even opened the door and stepped out for a better look. No engine sounds. No crunch of gravel. Just crickets and that light breeze in the cornfields. I thought maybe they'd turned down some hidden driveway, but there were no roads back there. Nothing but a straight line of cracked asphalt for at least a mile and a half. I'd just come from it. I'd have seen brake lights. I'd have heard tires on the gravel. Something. I stood there for a minute, just listening. There was this feeling, like the air had changed. The sound of the wind shifted, almost like everything else had gone still. I couldn't explain it. I just suddenly didn't want to be standing outside the car anymore. I got back in and locked the doors without even really thinking about it. The GPS was still trying to reroute. I ignored it and pulled back onto the road a little faster this time. My eyes kept jumping to the rear view. I figured I must have imagined it. Maybe it was a glare off something, a parked vehicle facing the road even. Weird timing, but not impossible. 10 minutes later, I saw them again. Same distance, same shape. Two steady white headlights, spaced like a car or truck. Just far enough to see them crest the hills behind me. I kept driving. I watched them. I tried slowing again, not pulling over, just easing off the gas to see if they'd gain. They didn't. They kept pace. I tapped the brakes once, just enough to flash them. Nothing. No reaction. I thought about turning on the dome light or calling someone just to be on the line, but I'd already checked earlier. 0 bars. That part of Missouri is dead for signal, just farmland and woods, no cell towers in sight. I couldn't even pick up the FM station anymore. Just static. I passed a road sign that said Malin Ridge 6 Mahler. I didn't know the town, but at least it meant I was close to something. I told myself I'd stop there if it had a gas station or diner, somewhere with lights. I kept checking the rear view. The lights were still there, not closer, not farther, like they were tethered to me. Then I passed an old church, one of those tiny brick ones with a tilted sign out front and a white bell tower. I remember it clearly because the minute I passed it, my headlights flickered. Just once, real quick. Like a camera flash. Then everything came back on. And the lights behind me were gone again. I slammed the brakes and looked back. Blackness. No curves in the road, no dips. Just a clear view back across the stretch of highway. No turnoffs, no driveways, no hills big enough to hide a vehicle. They were just gone. That's when I really started to feel it. That wrongness. Not fear, exactly. just this intense feeling like I was being watched. Like I wasn't alone in the car, even though I was. I kept glancing at the passenger seat, at the mirror. Nothing, obviously, but it didn't help. I told myself to keep moving, just get to Malin Ridge. 6 miles, 5 now, maybe 4. A minute later, my dash lights dimmed, not all the way, just enough to notice. Then, my radio popped back on by itself, full static. The dial was stuck at 88.8. I hadn't left it there. I turned the volume down, but the static stayed low like background noise. My engine was still fine, but the power fluctuations kept happening. The dash lights would fade in and out like someone was messing with the alternator. I passed a stretch of road with open fields on both sides. No trees, nothing but tall, dry grass and a line of telephone poles. That's when the lights came back, but not behind me this time. They were to the right, off the road, floating above the grass. At first, I thought it was a house, or maybe a tower, but they were too low, and they were moving, staying parallel to me, same speed. They looked like car headlights, just suspended 10 feet off the ground, drifting alongside me. No road over there, no fence either, just flat land. I sped up, they matched me. I slowed, they slowed. Then one blinked out. The other hovered a second longer, then zipped upward so fast I lost it in the night sky. No sound, no flash, just motion and then nothing. I watched the sky for movement. Nothing else. I floored it. I didn't care about potholes or cops. I just wanted out of there. When I hit Malin Ridge, it was barely a town. A post office, a volunteer fire station, and a gas station with one flickering light out front. But it was enough. I pulled in and sat there with the engine running. I waited to see if anything followed. Nothing did. I went inside, bought a coffee I didn't drink, pretended to check my phone like I had service. A kid behind the counter asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. I didn't even ask if they'd seen lights out on the highway. I didn't want to say it out loud. After about 15 minutes, I got back in my truck. I didn't take the back roads again. I stayed on the main highway all the way home. I was about 4 miles into a solo hike when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. No caller ID, just a string of zeros. Which was strange, but I still picked up without really thinking. There was no voice at first, just static. Not the kind you hear on speaker when you're far from signal, but loud, warbly, almost digital sounding static. It faded in and out like it was being pushed through something it wasn't supposed to go through. Then, right before the call cut out, I heard my name. Just once. Quiet. A man's voice, low and close, like he was speaking directly into my ear. Emily. That was it. I stopped walking without realizing it and just stood there holding the phone to my ear long after the call ended. My heart was pounding. I thought maybe someone from work was messing with me, or maybe it was spam. But the signal bars were gone. I couldn't call back. I couldn't even load the recent calls list. Nothing. Which was weird enough on its own, but it got weirder. I knew for a fact my phone had already been dead. It had gone black about an hour earlier, during the climb. I'd even tried to power it back on, but it wouldn't go past the Apple logo. I figured it had finally given out. The battery was old, didn't hold a charge anymore. But after that call, the screen was back on. Battery said 2%. I turned it off again and stuffed it into my pack. I don't know why. It just unsettled me. The trail was in the San Gabriel Mountains, up near Mount Waterman. Not many people go past the first lookout unless they're doing the full loop. I hadn't seen anyone else since the parking lot. The rest of the hike up was quiet, but I kept checking over my shoulder and I kept hearing things, nothing obvious, just faint little sounds that didn't belong, like something snapping once, not twice in the brush, or a single crunch of dirt like someone shifted their weight. That kind of thing. Enough to raise the hairs on my neck. I told myself it was probably deer, or maybe just normal forest sounds my brain was overreacting to. But I stopped taking breaks. I just wanted to get up to the summit and head back down. It was overcast, kind of cool for a July afternoon, and by the time I got to the clearing at the top, it was already getting darker than I expected. I didn't stay long, just sat for a few minutes on a boulder, drank some water, and then got moving again. About 10 minutes into the descent, I started feeling like I wasn't alone, and not in that what if someone's watching me way. It felt more specific, like someone was walking behind me, just far enough back that I couldn't see them if I turned around too fast. I stopped a few times and looked, but there was never anyone there. I even called out once, hey, is someone there? And waited. Nothing. Around the 3rd-mile marker, I heard my name again. Louder this time and clearer, not through the phone. Out loud. It sounded like it came from somewhere off-trail, downhill to my right, maybe 20, 30 feet into the trees. Emily. Just like before. Same man's voice. Quiet, not shouting. No urgency to it. Just saying my name like he already knew me. Like he was letting me know he was there. I froze for a long time. I didn't say anything back. I didn't even move. And after maybe 10 seconds, I turned and started walking again. A little faster now. I passed a switchback and made it around the bend, then ducked behind a big rock outcropping and waited. I wanted to see if someone came up the trail behind me. I figured if it was just some creep, I'd confront him in the open where I had space. But no one came. I waited at least 5 minutes. Nothing. That's when I took my phone back out, just on instinct. I didn't expect it to work, but it turned on. Battery said 3% now. Still no service. I checked my call log again. No missed calls, no received calls, no record of anything since the day before. It didn't make sense. And I wasn't thinking clearly at that point. I just wanted to be done. I started basically power walking the rest of the way down, not stopping to drink or rest. My legs started burning, but I didn't care. I didn't hear my name again, but I did start noticing a smell. It was faint, but weird, like hot metal and ozone, kind of sharp and electrical. It came and went. Sometimes it was strong, then it would vanish for a few minutes. When I finally reached the last stretch near the parking area, I relaxed a little. I could see my car at the bottom of the hill. There was one other car in the lot now, a dark blue Subaru with a roof rack, but no one around it. I figured someone else had started up the trail later than me. I got to my car, tossed my pack in the back seat, and sat inside with the doors locked for a minute before starting it up. I was trying to calm myself down, trying to figure out what I should do. Report it? But report what? Right before I pulled out, I glanced back at my phone again. Still on, still at 3%, and now it had 1 bar of service. I opened the call log. There was a new entry, just a blank space where the number should be. No digits, no name, and a timestamp that didn't make sense. 2:17 a.m. The call length said 01, 1 second. It wasn't even close to 2:17. It was just after 5 p.m. The screen froze for a second, then flickered and went black. Wouldn't turn back on. I drove home without stopping. I didn't see anyone on the highway for a while. Not unusual for that stretch, but it added to the weirdness. When I got home, the phone still wouldn't boot. I plugged it into the wall and it finally turned back on about an hour later. The battery showed 100%, the weird call log entry was gone, but the timestamp for my hiking photos still showed a gap, a long one, between the top of the trail and the first photo I took again, near the bottom. Almost 90 minutes. I remember the hike clearly. I didn't stop, I didn't sit down, I didn't black out, but I can't explain the time. And I haven't gone hiking alone since. I moved into my apartment in a quiet part of Salem, Massachusetts, late September last year. It's an old brick building on a side street. Nothing fancy, but it had decent rent and was close enough to the downtown area. I was mostly happy with it, close to work, near some parks, and the neighbors kept to themselves. The first few weeks went by normal enough. I was settling in, unpacking, figuring out my routines. The apartment has 2 big windows facing the street, one in the living room and one in the bedroom. There's a street lamp outside that casts a yellowish glow at night. I remember one of the first odd things I noticed was just how dark the corners of the rooms stayed, even with the lights on. That's not unusual in older buildings, but it was something I noted. The first time I saw it, I was lying on the couch, scrolling on my phone, and out of the corner of my eye, I caught a shadow just beyond the living room window. It wasn't a person or a tree. It was this dark, shapeless form, like a smudge or a silhouette. I looked directly toward it, but it wasn't there anymore. I figured it was just a trick of the light or my imagination. Over the next week, I kept catching glimpses like that, always in the corner of a room or just outside a window. The shape didn't have any clear edges or features, just a dark form that seemed to hover. It never moved toward me, not really, but it was always there, as if watching from a distance. I told myself I was just tired or stressed from work. My schedule had been kind of rough, and I was working late hours. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling grew heavier. One night, maybe a week after I moved in, I was in the kitchen making dinner when I saw the shape again, this time in the corner between the living room and the hallway. I blinked, looked right at it, and it faded away like smoke. I stood still, trying to tell myself it was a shadow from the street lamp or my own eyes playing tricks. But the way it disappeared wasn't natural. No flicker, no distortion, just gone. A couple of times, I thought I heard very faint noises, like a soft rustling or whisper, when the apartment was otherwise silent. But whenever I tried to listen closely or trace the sound, it stopped. I mentioned it once to my friend Clara when she came over. She joked about ghosts, but I didn't laugh. I just said maybe it was stress, and we dropped it. The most unsettling thing happened one evening when I was getting ready for bed. I had just finished brushing my teeth, and as I passed the bedroom window, I caught the shape again, standing just outside in the shadows under the tree. I froze, heart pounding, and stared hard. It was darker than the night, like a silhouette that absorbed light. It didn't move. After a few seconds, I blinked, and it was gone. That night, I left the curtains open to see if it would show again, but nothing appeared. In the following days, the sightings happened more often, sometimes twice a day. I tried changing the lighting, closing curtains, turning on lamps, but it made no difference. The shape was always just at the edge of my vision, never fully there, never close enough to touch or confront. I started noticing that my phone would sometimes glitch in weird ways when I was near the windows, apps freezing, the screen flickering, or the camera failing to open. One night I tried to take a picture of the shape outside the window, but the camera just showed static. I deleted the photo, thinking maybe my phone was acting up. I checked the building's history online, looking for any stories or reports, but found nothing unusual. No record of anything strange, no previous tenants mentioning odd events. The neighbors were friendly but private. No one brought it up. One weekend, I stayed home all day, trying to distract myself with cleaning and reading. That evening, I sat in the living room with the lights off except for a small lamp. I felt the usual presence at the edge of my vision. This time, instead of fading, the shape seemed to hold steady for a longer moment. I blinked and looked directly, but it didn't disappear immediately. It was like it was waiting. I didn't move for a while, just stared. Then the air seemed heavier, colder, but not like a draft, more like a weight pressing down. The hairs on my arms stood up. After maybe a minute, the shape slowly melted away, drifting out of sight like smoke blown by a gentle wind. I sat there, trying to calm down. The silence felt different afterward, deeper. I realized I'd been holding my breath. After that night, I started keeping a journal of when the shape appeared, what time it was, and how I felt. There wasn't a pattern, but it always happened in the late afternoon or evening, never in the morning. The feeling of being watched stayed with me constantly. I tried talking to people about it, but no one could explain it. Some said it sounded like sleep paralysis or just shadows caused by bad lighting, but it never fit perfectly. One night, I noticed the shape was outside the bedroom window again, but this time it seemed farther away, almost at the edge of the yard. I opened the window a crack to see if I could hear anything, but there was only the sound of wind through the trees. Nothing else. The next morning, I found some branches on the ground beneath the window, broken and scattered like something had brushed past. But there were no footprints, no disturbance in the dirt, just the broken twigs. I started feeling exhausted, not just tired, but drained. I thought maybe I was getting sick or just stressed, but my doctor said I was fine. Eventually, I told myself I needed to change something. I installed better curtains, tried bright daylight bulbs, rearranged the furniture. Nothing stopped the shape from appearing. Then one evening, after a long day at work, I came home and the shape wasn't where it usually showed up. I checked every corner, every window. It wasn't there. For the first time in weeks, I felt some relief. That night, I slept with the windows open and the lights off, something I hadn't done in a while. The air felt fresh. I woke up at 3 a.m. hearing a soft tapping on the living room window. I sat up, heart pounding, and saw nothing outside. No shape, no shadow, just the empty street and the quiet trees. Since then, the shape hasn't come back as often. Sometimes I catch it flickering in the corner of my eye, but it doesn't linger. The feeling of being watched isn't as strong. I don't know if it moved on or if I'm just used to it now. I still don't understand what it was or why it was there. It never tried to hurt me or communicate, just watched and faded away. I was out at Eagles Point that night, one of those warm summer evenings where the air feels thick but still carries a slight breeze from the lake below. I had driven out alone after work, wanted to clear my head. It's a spot I'd gone to a few times before. Nothing fancy, just a dirt pull-off with a worn path leading to a small lookout where you can see the whole valley stretching out. The town's lights blink faintly in the distance, and the stars above are usually bright and clear. I got there around 9:30, parking my old pickup on the side of the road. The night was calm, no bugs buzzing, no rustling leaves, just that soft hum of the world winding down. I grabbed my phone to check the map, figuring I'd just sit at the edge of the lookout and watch the sky for a bit before heading home. Right after I stepped off the truck, I noticed it. A patch of ground, maybe 2 feet wide, just near the edge of the clearing. The air around it looked a little different, not like heat haze or anything, just subtle. I remember thinking it looked like the kind of shimmer you see on a hot road, except it wasn't hot at all. I walked closer and suddenly felt it, this cold spot, but weirdly localized. The air on my face felt warm like the rest of the night, but when I stepped into that small patch, it hit me like a wall of cold. My breath fogged immediately, like I was suddenly standing outside on a freezing winter night, even though the temperature gauge on my phone said it was around 75 degrees. I blinked, looked down, half expecting to see frost or something, but the ground looked completely normal, just dirt and a few scattered leaves. I pulled out my phone again, trying to take a picture of the spot, but the screen flickered and froze for a second. The GPS signal dropped out and the flashlight app I had open went black. Then my phone rebooted on its own. That's when I noticed something else. My truck's key fob, which was in my pocket, started acting up. The panic button lit up and flashed even though I hadn't pressed anything. I took it out, fumbled with the buttons, and it stopped. I put it back in my pocket, and a few seconds later it started again, like something was messing with the electronics in the area. I stood there, feeling that weird cold spreading a little across my feet, and the hairs on my neck prickled. I decided to step out of the cold patch. The instant I moved just a few feet away, the chill lifted. My breath stopped fogging. The air felt normal again. I looked back at the spot, like a circle in the dirt maybe 2 feet wide, but nothing visibly unusual. I tried my phone again. It worked fine this time. The GPS signal came back. The screen lit up normally. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I sat down on a nearby rock, just a few feet from the spot, pulling my jacket tighter, even though it wasn't cold anywhere else. I pulled out my handheld radio, something I usually bring when I'm out hiking or scouting around. I switched it on and static crackled for a moment before fading to silence. I tried switching channels. At first it was just the usual white noise, but then there was a faint tone, like a low-frequency hum, nothing clear, but definitely not normal static. I fiddled with the dial and then switched the radio off and back on. The hum disappeared. Everything went silent again. The weird thing was, no other sounds seemed off. No animals, no birds, no wind, just that quiet hum for a few seconds, and then nothing. I sat there for maybe 15 minutes, watching the stars, occasionally glancing at the cold spot. It didn't change, didn't flicker or glow or anything. Just stayed there like a patch of chilled air hanging in the warm night. I got the sense that something was wrong with that spot, like it wasn't supposed to be there. My mind kept going over it, but I couldn't explain it. Finally, I decided to get up and leave. I figured I'd check my truck and maybe drive down to the diner in town before heading home. The moment I stepped back into the cold patch to retrieve my jacket that I'd dropped earlier, the cold hit me again. My breath fogged up, my skin prickled. I didn't want to spend any more time there, so I stepped out again, heading back to the truck. The cold instantly vanished like it was a switch. When I looked back at the spot one last time before climbing into the cab, I noticed something else. The grass around the edge of the cold patch looked flattened, like someone or something had sat or knelt there recently. The leaves were disturbed, but there was no sign of footprints or any other mark. No tire tracks, no animal prints. I had been the only one there when I arrived. The next morning, I went back during daylight, figuring I'd find some explanation. The cold spot was gone. No flattened grass, no shimmer in the air, nothing but dry dirt and normal leaves. I walked the area carefully. The ground was completely normal, just a typical patch of forest floor. I checked my phone and key fob. Both worked perfectly. No glitches. I haven't been back since. I still wonder what that patch was. Why was it cold in one tiny spot on such a warm night? Why did my electronics go crazy just standing near it? And why did it disappear like it was never there at all? I keep thinking about it whenever I'm out late or alone in the woods. I don't have answers, just a memory of a cold spot on a warm summer night. I moved into my new place on the edge of town in early October. It's a quiet neighborhood, mostly older houses with big yards and lots of trees. I'd been looking for a spot that felt a bit isolated, but still close enough to town, and this place fit the bill. The house next door had been empty for months, or so I thought, until a new neighbor showed up seemingly overnight. I first noticed him about a week after I moved in. I was outside doing some yard work when I caught a glimpse through the window of the house next door. There was a man inside, sitting at a table near the front window. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, neatly dressed but nothing fancy. Kind of plain, really. When he saw me looking, he gave a small nod and smiled politely before turning back to whatever he was doing. After that, I started seeing him more often at night. He was always in the house, but never outside during the day. I never saw a car, no sign of anyone coming or going. At first, I thought maybe he worked strange hours or was just shy, but it got stranger as the days went by. No mail was ever delivered to that house, and I never heard a single phone ring or loud noise. Curious, I tried to say hello a couple of times when I saw his silhouette through the curtains, but he never answered the door. One evening, I waved from my porch, and he just gave a faint wave back before disappearing into the shadows of the house. I talked to a few neighbors down the street, and no one had heard anything about him. No one knew his name, where he came from, or even if he was real. It was like he just appeared. I kept checking the county records online, but the house was still listed as vacant, which made no sense because I was pretty sure someone was living there. The first strange thing happened a few nights after I noticed him. I was inside watching TV when the power flickered a couple of times. Then I caught it, a soft, pulsating light glowing through the windows of that house next door. It wasn't a normal light. It was a dull red, almost like a heartbeat in color and rhythm. It would brighten for a few seconds, then fade, then brighten again. The pattern was steady, slow, and kind of mesmerizing. I figured maybe it was some weird decorative light or maybe an old neon sign. I called out once to see if anyone was home, but there was no answer. After about 15 minutes, the light went out and everything was dark again. The next day, I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a faulty lamp or something left on accidentally. But the light showed up every night after that, always the same slow pulse, never any other colors or sounds. About 4 or 5 days in, I thought I heard something else, a very faint humming, almost like a low vibration coming from that direction late at night. It wasn't steady, more like a gentle thrum that would come and go. I checked my own house's wiring just to be sure it wasn't electrical, but everything was normal. I started keeping an eye on the place more closely. I wanted to see if the guy ever went outside during the day, but he never did. The curtains were always closed tight until after sunset, when that weird pulsing light would start. Then one morning, about a week after I first saw him, I noticed the house looked empty. The curtains were drawn back, windows open like the place had been aired out, but no furniture, no signs of life. I mean, the place was completely bare, no chairs, no table, nothing that looked like someone had been living there. I even walked over to check the front door. It was unlocked, so I peeked inside as far as I could. It was just an empty shell. I didn't see any boxes or bags that would suggest someone had packed up and left. It was like the house had never been lived in at all. But the strangest part? That pulsing red light. It was still there, shining through the empty windows at night, just like before. I called the local police non-emergency line to report the strange light and the vacant house situation, hoping maybe they could tell me if it was some kind of code or emergency signal. They said the house was still technically unoccupied and no one was registered there. No reports of anything unusual. I thought maybe it was a prank or some electrical fault, but when I went by during the day, the next few days, there was no equipment, no wires running outside, nothing to explain it. Over the following week, the light never stopped. Every night, that same slow, rhythmic pulse glowing red behind the empty windows. I started feeling weird about it, like I was being watched, or that something wasn't right. I looked for any security cameras on nearby houses, but saw none aimed this way. My phone sometimes acted strangely near the house, calls dropping or the screen flickering, though I couldn't say for sure it was connected. One night I stayed up late just watching the house. The street was quiet except for the occasional car passing far down the road. The light pulsed steadily, and I swear I could catch movement behind the glass, shadows shifting slightly, but no one ever stepped into the light. Eventually, I stopped checking so often. It felt pointless. A few weeks after the house emptied out, I found out the property had been sold recently to an out-of-state owner. No one lives there now. I haven't seen the light in a while either. The windows are covered again, and everything looks normal. I still wonder what that neighbor was doing there for that week, who he was, and what that pulsing light really meant. Whatever it wasn't something I'm likely to understand. I was walking home late one night through the cornfields near my house in central Iowa. It was around 11 p.m., maybe a little later. I usually don't take that route after dark, but that night I missed the bus and figured I could cut through the fields to save some time. The air was still and humid, the kind you get in late summer just before a storm rolls in, though no rain was coming yet. The moon was mostly hidden by clouds, so the field was darker than usual. The corn was tall, maybe 8 feet or more, and it rustled softly in the breeze. I could hear crickets and the occasional frog croak, but mostly just the quiet shuffle of my footsteps through the dirt path I knew ran between the rows. I wasn't worried. I'd been out there plenty of times before, usually in the daytime, but sometimes in the evening with friends. Never by myself this late, though. As I was walking, I caught a faint red glow ahead, just between the stalks. At first, I thought it was some farm equipment left running, or maybe one of those small blinking marker lights they sometimes put on irrigation systems. The lights were small and blinked slowly, red and soft, like the tail lights on a tractor. It was about 20 feet ahead, not too far. Curious, I headed toward it. As I got closer, the lights seemed to lower from where I thought they were. I looked more carefully and realized they weren't on any machines or poles. Instead, the red lights hovered just above the ground, flickering gently like little fireflies, but in a very steady pattern. They didn't flash wildly or move around erratically, just a slow, rhythmic blink. I stopped and looked around, trying to figure out what was going on. The corn around the lights didn't move, except when I brushed against it. The lights then slowly began to rise. Not fast, more like a smooth, careful float. They lifted from just above the dirt up to about eye level with me, maybe 4 or 5 feet off the ground. I swear they didn't drift away or scatter like bugs might, just moved straight up, one after the other, as if someone was raising them by hand. I was getting a little uneasy now, but I wasn't sure what I was even seeing. I called out softly, "Hello?" But there was no answer. The lights blinked in the same slow pattern. Nothing changed except they were all at roughly the same height now, facing me from the rows on either side. My heart was starting to beat faster, and I pulled out my phone, flipping on the flashlight to get a better look. The moment the light came on, the red lights vanished. Just gone, like they were never there. The cornfield was pitch dark again, except for my phone's beam cutting through the stalks. I stayed still for a moment, scanning with the flashlight. Nothing. No sounds except my breathing and the usual bugs. I turned the light off and took a step forward, then another. The silence pressed in, thick and heavy, like the air was holding its breath. I was about halfway through the path when I heard a soft tapping behind me. Not loud, more like a faint knocking sound on the stalks, rhythmic, almost like a code but slower. I spun around, shining the flashlight back, but nothing was there. No movement, no shadow, just empty corn swaying lightly. I tried to convince myself it was a branch, or maybe an animal, a raccoon or a bird maybe. But the tapping stopped as suddenly as it started, and I didn't hear anything else. I didn't want to stick around, so I quickened my pace, walking faster through the field. The path wasn't straight. It twisted a little with the way the crops were planted, so I had to be careful not to trip. The night felt colder now, even though the air hadn't changed much. Then I noticed something else. The flashlight on my phone started flickering, just for a second, then back on. I tapped the screen, tried to reset it, but it was glitchy, dimming and brightening like it was struggling to stay on. I stopped again, looked around. That's when I heard it, a low humming noise. Not loud, maybe just a few feet away, but definitely there. It wasn't mechanical like a tractor or electric like a power line, more like a deep, constant vibration that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I pointed my phone toward the sound, but the beam was too weak now to see anything. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was probably some animal or wind through the stalks, but I was wrong. Suddenly, the humming stopped, and the air grew dead quiet again, like someone had flipped a switch. I felt my skin prickling, like I just walked through something cold and invisible. I didn't like it. I didn't want to be there. I started moving again, faster now, the corn rustling loudly as I pushed through. My phone finally died completely, leaving me with only the moonlight, which was still faint and filtered through thick clouds. Then, out of the dark, I saw something else. A pair of red lights blinking slowly, low to the ground again, just like before. They were exactly where I'd seen the first set when I started. I froze. The lights didn't move or respond. They just blinked, steady and calm, as if waiting for me. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my eyes on them, but not wanting to get too close. My throat felt dry. I didn't want to look away, but I also didn't want to stare. After a few seconds, I turned and ran out of the field, back toward the main road and the streetlights near my house. When I got home, everything was normal. My phone wouldn't turn on until I plugged it in, and even then, it acted sluggish. My skin felt like it had been sunburned, tight and warm, but I hadn't been outside in the sun that day. I told my parents I got lost in the dark and just got scared. They didn't ask many questions. It's been weeks since that night, but sometimes when I'm outside alone at dusk or in the dark, I think about those lights. I wonder if I should have tried to follow them, or if I was lucky to get away at all. I don't really know what they were, or if anyone else saw them. I don't walk through the cornfields at night anymore. I was out hiking alone in the foothills of the Cascades one weekend in late October. My name's Eric, and I usually spend my weekends in the woods just to get away from everything. That area isn't popular or heavily trafficked, mostly locals and some hunters, and the weather was crisp but dry, the kind that makes the leaves snap underfoot and the air feel sharp. I parked at the trailhead early afternoon. The sun was low but still bright, making the colors of the forest pop. Orange, red, brown, that kind of fall vibe. I was carrying a small pack with the usual stuff: water, snacks, a camera, my keys, and a multi-tool on my belt. I'm a bit old school, so I also had a compass, though I rarely had to use it. I started down a familiar trail that I've taken a few times before, but I wanted to explore a little farther than usual. About an hour in, I pulled out my compass to check my direction, planning to turn back soon, but the needle was spinning wildly like a busted toy. I stopped and stared, thinking maybe it was just broken. I shook it gently, but it kept spinning in circles. That struck me as weird. I figured I must be near some kind of interference, maybe old mining equipment or buried metal. I looked around for anything out of place, but the trail was pretty natural. A few rocks, some fallen logs, the usual stuff. No power lines, no metal fences, nothing that would explain the compass acting up. Curious, I pulled out my keys and multi-tool and held them loosely in my hand. Both of them started to tug ever so slightly toward one side. Nothing strong, but definitely a pull, like something was quietly pulling them along the trail. I noticed my belt buckle was doing the same thing. That's when I realized I was being pulled off the marked path onto a narrower side trail I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't on my map. The weird tugging got stronger the further I went down it, like a magnetic pull drawing me in. The light was dimming as the trees thickened. The air grew still, and the usual sounds of the forest, birds, wind, squirrels, just stopped. The silence was total. I stopped and listened, but it was like the forest had held its breath. At this point, I was feeling uneasy, but I figured maybe it was just a weird natural phenomenon. I pulled out my camera, a decent DSLR I always carry, thinking maybe I'd catch some shots of the fading light through the leaves. But when I pressed the power button, nothing happened. The screen stayed black, no sound, no light. I tried the battery compartment, thinking it might be loose, but everything was fine. The camera just wouldn't turn on. I tried switching it off and on again, hoping it was a glitch. Still nothing. I even pulled out my phone to see if maybe that would work as a backup light source or camera, but the screen flickered weirdly and then went dark. By now, the trail was barely visible, covered in thick layers of leaves and broken branches. The feeling of being watched crept up on me, but there was no one there, just the dead silence pressing in. I wanted to turn back, but every time I tried to retrace my steps, the tugging on my keys and belt buckle shifted to a different direction, like the trail was moving, or maybe I was walking in circles. I'd look up and feel like I was losing sense of where north was, even though I'd started with the compass. After what felt like a long time, maybe an hour or so, I reached a small clearing. The trees here were tall, but their branches were all bare, no leaves at all. The ground was covered in a thick layer of pine needles, completely muffling footsteps. The silence was even deeper here, like the air was holding itself still. I raised my camera again and tried to turn it on. Nothing. The phone wouldn't power on either. I sat down on a fallen log, trying to calm myself and figure out what was going on. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, though the air wasn't cold exactly, just heavy. I kept hearing a faint, barely there humming sound, almost like the wind, but there was no wind. It was steady and soft, coming from all around me. It felt wrong, unnatural. I looked back down the trail I'd come in on, but the trees looked denser now, like a wall. The path seemed to disappear, swallowed by the forest. I started walking again, this time following the tug on my keys and belt buckle, hoping they'd lead me out. The trail bent and twisted unnaturally, and the forest seemed to close in tighter. The whole time, the humming stayed with me, steady, low, and constant. I couldn't find any source for it. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably closer to 30 minutes, I emerged back onto the main trail. The compass stopped spinning, the tugging on my stuff disappeared. The birds started chirping again. I took a deep breath and checked my camera. It powered on normally, no problem. My phone lit up with notifications from the time I'd been gone. The sun was just setting now, and the forest looked ordinary again, full of life and sound. I didn't take any pictures on that side trail. I didn't tell anyone at first because it sounded crazy, like I'd gotten lost or imagined the whole thing. But it stuck with me, how everything stopped, how the compass spun, and how the metal things pulled me deeper into that silent patch of forest. I went back a week later, in daylight, hoping to find the trail and figure out what was going on. The side trail was barely visible, overgrown and blending in with the rest of the woods. No humming, no compass issues, nothing. I don't know what that place was or what I walked into, but I'm sure something was there. Something that made the forest stop, made my gear act weird, and held me there longer than I realized. I kept hiking after that, but I never went down that trail again. I was out chasing storms again that July afternoon, somewhere near Dodge City, Kansas. I'd been doing this for a few years, watching weather, chasing cells, trying to get good footage or photos, whatever. Nothing crazy, just a hobby that got me driving hours at a time, sometimes sitting out in the middle of nowhere watching the sky change. That day started out normal, even a bit slow. The forecast showed some scattered thunderstorms rolling through, but nothing too intense or organized. The wind was steady and warm, around 85 degrees, with that heavy summer air hanging low. I parked on the side of a dirt road just outside town, about a mile from a small farmstead, and set up my camera gear on the hood of my truck. The sky was mostly clear, with some clouds moving pretty fast, pushed by a strong southwesterly wind. The clouds themselves were the usual stuff: thin cirrus and some puffy cumulus gathering in the distance, the kind you expect before a thunderstorm. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed something off. One cloud, a small grayish one about the size of a large van, just sat still. The others all moved at a good clip, racing east with the wind, but this one wasn't moving at all. Not a millimeter. At first, I thought maybe it was a trick of perspective, or maybe it was anchored to something like a hill or a rising current of air, but there were no hills nearby, just flat fields and low scrub. The cloud hovered low, maybe 500 feet off the ground, definitely below the other clouds. What made it even weirder was the sky around it, completely clear, no clouds or haze. Yet lightning was flickering in the blue sky all around the still cloud. No thunderstorm overhead, just these brief, sharp white flashes like static electricity dancing through the air. I stood there, squinting up at the sky. The lightning wasn't the kind you usually see during storms, no big bolts or forks. Just little, quick flickers, like the crackle from a Van de Graaff generator or the static you get from a TV screen that's not tuned right. The air felt different, too. It was heavy, almost charged. I swear I could feel a tiny tingling on my skin and hair standing up on my arms. It was subtle. Not like the shock you get from touching a metal doorknob, but enough to make me pause. I grabbed my handheld anemometer, one of those small devices that measures wind speed, to check the wind near the ground. It read steady at 15 miles per hour. Then I pointed it up at the cloud. Nothing. The cloud stayed absolutely still. The wind was moving the other clouds at a solid 20-25 miles per hour. I double-checked the weather app on my phone, and the radar showed no unusual activity in the area. The storm cells were still miles away. I took a video with my phone, trying to capture the flickering lightning around the cloud and the fact it wasn't moving like the others. The camera picked up the flashes clearly, but oddly, when I played it back, the sound was just background wind noise. No crackles or static at all. That was the first strange thing. I waited for a while, watching the cloud. It was motionless for at least 15 minutes, maybe closer to 20. The other clouds drifted by fast, changing shape and moving along. This one stayed like a frozen blotch against the sky. The air charge grew heavier, or at least it felt that way. My hair stood up more, and there was this quiet buzzing noise in my ears, like when you're near power lines, but softer, almost imperceptible. Then, without warning, the cloud blinked out. It didn't drift away or evaporate gradually. It just vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't, like someone switched off a light. The spot in the sky where the cloud had been stayed perfectly clear and blue, but the strange flickering lightning kept happening, now all around the empty space. I blinked, stared, half expecting the cloud to reappear or for something else to happen, but nothing did. I sat back in the driver's seat, heart racing a bit, trying to make sense of it. The sky was calm again, the normal wind returned, and the usual hum of cicadas and distant trucks came back into focus. I started the engine and drove back toward town, but the feeling stuck with me. That spot in the sky, the silence of the cloud, the electric charge, none of it fit any weather pattern or storm behavior I'd seen before. Later, I checked my video again on my laptop. The cloud's stillness was obvious, and the flickering lights showed up. But the sound was always normal wind noise. Nothing electric. Nothing strange. I tried calling a few meteorologists I knew, but they just shrugged or said maybe it was a weird, isolated weather effect or a small thermal bubble. Maybe it was. But I can't shake the way the cloud just stayed frozen, how the air buzzed with static, and how it disappeared if it ever existed. That's all I have. No big boom, no lights in the sky, just that one motionless cloud and a silent, charged calm around it. I pulled off the highway just before dawn, parking on a gravel turnout a few miles outside of Taos, New Mexico. I'd been driving all night from Denver down through the desert, just trying to make it back home before my morning shift. I was exhausted, eyes heavy, and honestly just needed a break from the highway's endless hum. The sky was clear, dark, and full of stars. I got out of my truck, stretched my legs, and looked up. I wasn't an astronomer or anything, but I liked the stars. They made the desert feel less empty. The cold air was sharp on my face, like a shock after the stale warmth inside the truck. I lit a cigarette and tried to focus on the familiar shapes overhead. That's when I noticed something. Orion, one of the constellations I always recognized, looked wrong. Not totally wrong, but off enough to pull my attention hard. Two stars were missing, not just dimmed, but completely gone. And another star was in a place it shouldn't have been, like someone had nudged it sideways. I blinked. Twice. Looked again. Orion was back to normal. My breath fogged in front of me, and I shivered, even though it wasn't cold enough for that. I reached into my pocket and grabbed my phone, but the screen was cracked and I'd lost signal miles back. So I pulled out my dash cam, the little GoPro I keep mounted behind the rearview mirror, for the rare accident or weird roadside moment. I wanted to check the timestamp, see exactly when I'd stopped. The clock on the dash cam blinked, then reset itself to midnight. I'd pulled over around 5:30 a.m. based on my watch and the position of the moon, but this was telling me otherwise. Midnight. Several hours earlier. I stared at the dashcam screen, heart ticking a little faster. I was tired, sure. But this wasn't tired confusion. Something wasn't right. I smoked the rest of the cigarette and looked back up at the sky. The stars were perfectly normal again, just like they always had been. The Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, the Milky Way arching faintly above, nothing out of place. I closed my eyes and tried to calm down, thinking maybe I'd just been seeing things from exhaustion. When I opened them, there was a faint glow on the horizon to the east. Not the sunrise. Too early for that, but a pale, pulsing light. It wasn't steady, more like it was flickering slowly. I turned back to the truck to grab my binoculars, but that's when I heard it. Not a noise I could place. No engine, no animal call, no footsteps. Just a kind of low hum. Not loud, but definitely there. It wasn't like any wind or road noise I'd ever heard. I tried to look toward the light, but the hills blocked my view. The hum grew for a moment, then stopped, like someone flipped a switch. I felt a strange chill, but the temperature on my phone said it was about 48 degrees. Cool, but nothing unusual for early morning in the desert. I pulled my jacket tighter and sat back on the tailgate. I wanted to think through what I'd seen and heard, but my mind kept circling back to that weird shift in the stars. I took a swig from my water bottle and pulled my jacket hood over my head. The hum started again, soft, rhythmic now, almost like a heartbeat. I got up and tried to follow the sound down the road a little, hoping to catch a glimpse of the source of that flickering light. The road was empty, just dirt and scrub stretching out under the sky. The further I walked, the more the stars seemed to blur around the edges, like I was looking through a lens that was smudged or out of focus. My breathing felt shallower, but not because I was out of breath, just off. I stopped and looked around. Nothing was moving. No birds or bugs, no wind in the bushes. The silence stretched until I noticed my footsteps didn't sound right. Normally, even on dirt, there'd be some crunch or slap, but this was quieter, almost like my feet weren't touching the ground fully. I shook my head. Maybe I'd lost my hearing for a second, or was just tired. Then I glanced down and realized something else was wrong. My shadow wasn't there. The faint glow from the horizon lit the ground enough that I should have had a shadow, but there was none. I looked back at the sky. The stars looked sharp again, but my breath fogged in front of me like it was freezing cold, even though I could still see my own breath. Suddenly, the hum stopped altogether. I blinked and felt a dizziness wash over me. I leaned against a fence post for a moment, then looked up again. The flickering light on the horizon was gone. I turned to head back to my truck, stepping quickly now. My shadow reappeared with the next step, and the normal sound of my footsteps came back. When I got back to the truck, I fumbled with the dash cam. The clock still read midnight. I glanced at my watch. It was 5:40 a.m. Something had happened between those times. Maybe a few minutes, maybe hours, but I had no idea what. I got back in, locked the doors, and started the engine. The desert was waking up. Birds finally started calling, and a light breeze kicked up. As I drove away, I kept glancing up at the sky, half expecting the stars to shift again. They didn't. Just the usual constellations, steady and unchanged. But the dashcam's clock kept blinking midnight. I still don't know how to explain it. It happened on a Thursday evening, late July. I was walking my dog like usual, a black lab mix named Casey, around the block before it got too dark. We live in a small town outside Missoula, not rural exactly, but quiet. Just regular neighborhood stuff, chain link fences, gravel driveways, porch lights on timers. It had been hot all day. One of those dry Montana heat waves where the asphalt sticks a little under your shoes and you can smell pine sap baking on the trees. Even at 8:30, the air still felt like standing too close to an oven. Casey didn't seem to mind. She was trotting ahead on her usual loop around the corner, sniffing weeds and fence posts like always. We were halfway down Morgan Street when I noticed my breath. Just white fog in front of me, like it was January. I stopped walking, took another breath. Same thing. Clear little puff right there in the air. I looked down at Casey. She didn't seem to notice anything wrong, still sniffing a mailbox post like it owed her money. I turned in a circle slowly. No breeze, no weird sounds. The sun was still visible behind the trees, though low, just starting to touch the horizon. Then I actually felt it. The cold. It hit me across the chest first, like I'd walked into a walk-in freezer. No gradual drop, just bang. Cold. I looked at the hair on my arms, goosebumps all over. I pulled the leash a little to get Casey to move along. She hesitated, sniffed at the air, then started walking again. I swear in those next few steps, the air got colder. My ears stung. My nose started running. I glanced to my right and saw frost, actual frost, forming on a short metal fence post next to the sidewalk. That crusty silver layer just collecting fast like time-lapse footage. I stared at it, blinking, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I put my hand out toward it, but stopped an inch away. It was too cold. Not like a cool evening, like dead of winter cold. Middle of summer, middle of the block, and my fingers were going numb. Casey growled. Not loud, but low and steady. I looked down, and she was stiff, ears back, tail low. Then she barked once, sharp, and spun around on the sidewalk. She lunged so hard I stumbled back, but the leash was looped around my wrist. I held tight, bracing, and that's when it happened. The cold just vanished. It was like someone flipped a switch. 1 second I could see my breath and feel it in my teeth, and the next second it was just hot again. Sticky and dry, the way it had been all day. My breath didn't fog anymore. No frost on the post. Nothing. And Casey's leash, it was gone. I swear on everything, the leash that had been looped twice around my wrist just wasn't there anymore. I looked down at my hand. My fingers were still clenched like I was holding something, but nothing was there. Just my hand. Empty. I spun around. Casey was halfway down the street already, tail tucked, running in that weird half-hunched way dogs do when they're panicked. I shouted her name and ran after her. I wasn't thinking clearly. My heart was hammering, and I still felt like my arms had been dunked in ice water. She ran all the way home, 3 blocks, and was scratching at the front door when I caught up. I had to unlock it with shaking hands, and as soon as it opened, she bolted inside and hid under the table. I stood there on the porch for a second, just breathing. Everything looked normal. Crickets chirping, porch lights glowing. A couple houses had sprinklers running, mist catching the low light. But something about the street felt off, too still, too clean, like a stage set. Almost. Inside, I poured some water and sat down. Casey didn't come out for 10 minutes. When she did, she stayed close and wouldn't let me near the door again. I checked my wrist for marks. There were none. No rope burn, no redness. It was like the leash had never been there. Later that night, I went back outside just to check. I walked the same route we took. Same fence post, no frost, nothing unusual. I even touched the metal. It was warm from the day's sun. The grass was dry and scratchy. The air didn't feel wrong anymore, but I couldn't get myself to finish the whole loop. I turned back early. The next morning, I checked the leash hooks by the door. Casey has 2. A long one for trails and a short one for neighborhood walks. The long one was there. The short one, the one I'd used the night before, was missing. I searched the whole house. Laundry room, couch cushions, car trunk, nothing. I even walked the street again in daylight, thinking maybe it had slipped off and I hadn't noticed. But it wasn't anywhere. I didn't drop it. I felt it on my wrist when it disappeared. We didn't go for a walk that night, or the next. I bought a new leash 2 days later. Same brand, same length, but it felt weird in my hand. Casey's been fine since, mostly. She still barks at the window sometimes when it's dark, but she always did that. I've never felt that cold again. Not like that. Not so fast or so deep. Sometimes I try to recreate the moment in my head, like what would happen if I hadn't stopped at that exact part of the sidewalk? If I'd crossed the street earlier, or if Casey hadn't been on a leash at all. Whatever that cold was, it came fast and left faster. But the space it took up, that patch of sidewalk, still feels different. Like air moves funny there. I don't stop on that block anymore. We cross the street without thinking. The leash never showed up. My buddy Ray and I were parked out by Lake Blanche last August. We'd gone up there after work just to unwind a bit. It's one of those little mountain lakes tucked away up in the Wasatch, about an hour from Salt Lake. No boats, no cabins, just a hiking trail that leads you up to it. You get some peace out there. We packed a couple sandwiches, beers in the cooler, and hiked up around 6. Took our time. Sun was low by the time we got to the top, around 7:30. There's a little rocky ridge that slopes down to the west side of the lake. You can sit there and look right out over the water and watch the light fade off the trees. We didn't see anyone else up there, which wasn't too surprising on a weeknight. We ate, talked about work, nothing exciting. Around 8, the light really started to go, that purple tint the sky gets before the stars come out. We were just sitting there, not saying much anymore. Kind of that quiet you settle into when the temperature drops and everything goes still. I noticed the lake first. There were these little ripples near the center, not wind-driven, more like something had disturbed the surface, even though nothing had touched it. No fish jumping, no leaves falling, just this circular pulse that came and went, slow and wide. Ray saw it too. He leaned forward and said, "You see that?" I nodded, but we didn't move. I was trying to figure out what would cause that without any sound. The air was dead still, not even a breeze. And the ripples didn't look like they started from anything. It was like the water decided to move on its own. I was about to say maybe it was groundwater shifting underneath or something. That's weird, and pointed out at the lake. I looked. He was staring at the stars, or the reflection of them, I should say. The sky had just gone dark enough for the stars to come out, and the lake was calm, so you could see them reflected almost perfectly. But what Ray was pointing at was off. The stars above us and the ones in the lake didn't match. Like you could pick out the Big Dipper overhead, plain as day, but in the water it wasn't there. Or it was just skewed, like a funhouse version. I stood up and stepped closer to the edge. The water was like glass now, except for the occasional wide ripple that would roll through like before. Then we both noticed the patch. Dead center of the lake, there was this part of the reflection where no stars showed at all, just a black shape. Not circular, kind of irregular, maybe like a stretched oval, but it wasn't a shadow from a tree or a cloud. There weren't any clouds. We looked up, expecting to see something blocking that part of the sky. There was nothing. No plane, no shape, not even a shift in the air. But in the lake, the patch was moving. Slowly, steadily, that starless spot drifted toward the far end of the lake, just a subtle gliding motion, like an ink stain sliding under the surface. The stars around it shimmered like normal, but that spot remained flat, dull, like the water wasn't even catching light there. Ray said, real quiet, "That's not right." We both kept staring. I had this urge to pick up a rock and throw it, but something told me not to. Not in a dramatic way, just a pressure in the back of my head, like I shouldn't mess with it. The patch kept moving. It didn't speed up or change shape, just slowly eased its way toward the eastern tree line until it passed out of the reflection entirely. And then the ripples stopped. The water went totally still again. And this weird silence settled in, not just the absence of noise, but the kind of quiet that feels too complete. No insects, no wind, no distant rustle. Like someone had pressed mute on the whole mountain. Ray said, "Let's go." We packed up without talking, left the rest of the food, just grabbed our bags and started down. Normally we'd take our time, use our headlamps, the light faded, it's a rocky trail and steep in places. But that night we didn't stop. Didn't turn on the lamps either. Just walked in the dimming dusk until the trees swallowed the last of the sky. The whole way down, I kept glancing behind us. Never saw anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't alone. Ray didn't say a word until we got back to the car. When we hit the gravel lot at the base of the trail, he just exhaled and said, "Man!" We got in, locked the doors, sat there for a second before either of us moved. The inside of the car felt too small, like the air was heavy. I turned the key and the headlights flicked on. For a half second, they didn't catch anything, just black. Then the trees lit up like normal. Ray said, "You saw that too, right?" I just nodded. We didn't talk the whole drive back. Next morning, I checked a star map app, just curious. Compared what should have been overhead that night to what we saw. I still can't figure out how the reflection was that far off. It wasn't flipped like you'd expect from a mirror image. It was like a whole different patch of sky was being shown in the lake. Haven't been back to Blanche since. Ray hasn't either, far as I know. It was the second week of October, right around when the leaves start going full color and the mornings have that thin layer of frost that crunches under your boots. I'd been hunting that stretch of national forest in western Pennsylvania for about 6 years. Never had anything weird happen before, unless you count a bear sniffing my truck one time. I parked at the pull-off around 5:30 a.m. It was still dark, stars out, clear sky, about 34 degrees. I'd scouted a new area the weekend before, a shallow ridge with some scattered birch and a low grassy clearing that had lots of deer sign. I'd hung a trail cam on a tree facing the clearing and baited it with corn. My plan was to sit in a blind about 30 yards back and just watch for the morning. By the time I got to the spot, the sun was just starting to bleed in behind the trees. That gray pre-dawn where everything looks kind of two-dimensional. Quiet morning. No wind, not even a squirrel yet. I was walking slow, rifle slung, watching for movement when I noticed how still everything was. Like too still. It wasn't just quiet, it was silent. No birds, no chipmunks, not even crickets. Usually I'd at least hear crows or rustling in the brush. I figured maybe something big had come through earlier and spooked everything. Could have been a bear or a coyote pack. I kept going. Didn't feel scared exactly, just alert. When I stepped into the clearing, I saw them. At first I thought I was looking at leaves or sticks. Then I realized they were animals. Dozens of them. Birds, squirrels, a raccoon, all lying on the ground like just fallen over. Not piled, not bloody, just placed. Spread out kind of evenly like someone had scattered them like trash. I dropped to a knee next to a gray squirrel. Its eyes were open, chest not moving. But when I touched its side, it twitched. Barely. Same with the robin next to it. Breathing was shallow, like once every 20 seconds. None of them woke up or ran. None looked hurt. No foam, no blood, no weird smell, just frozen. Alive, but not. I didn't go all the way across the clearing. It was maybe 100 feet wide. I probably checked 10 or 12 animals. All the same. No bugs either. No flies, no mosquitoes, nothing moving on the ground. It was like the whole patch of woods just paused. My first thought, stupidly, was maybe there was a gas leak underground. But I wasn't dizzy or nauseous, and I hadn't seen any signs of construction out there ever. Besides, gas wouldn't make things lie down neatly like that. I stood there probably 5-6 minutes just staring. Then I remembered my trail cam. I'd hung it chest high on a birch tree facing the bait pile. I went over to it, opened the housing. It was still on, batteries full. I waved my hand in front of it. The little red light blinked like it was recording. I didn't want to stay. I don't know why. I've been in the woods most of my life, and I've never had a moment like that. I just felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. I walked back to the truck faster than I should have with a rifle on my back. Got home, popped the SD card in my laptop. Footage was fine up until 2:18 a.m., then nothing. It picked back up at 2:45. That's when it recorded a leaf blowing in front of the lens. No errors, no gaps in file naming, just a clean cut. 27 minutes missing like the camera was turned off, then turned back on again. No deer, no coyotes, not even wind. I went back out the next morning around 9 a.m. Didn't feel like going in the dark again. I brought my buddy Chris with me that time, told him something weird had happened, but didn't go into detail. We got to the clearing and everything looked totally normal. Birds chirping, insects buzzing, a chipmunk even ran across the path right in front of us. The grass looked untouched. No sign of anything lying there the day before. I showed him where the animals had been, but there was nothing. No impressions in the dirt, no fur, no feathers. We checked the trail cam again. It had recorded steadily all night. Nothing missing. I even counted the files. When I got home, I looked up sunspots, chemical leaks, even radiation stuff. Nothing I found made sense, especially not how they all came back to life, or if they even left. The weirdest part, and I don't even like saying this out loud, is that I never heard a single thing while I was in that clearing. No plane overhead, no wind. It felt like being in a vacuum, like the woods had gone hollow. I still hunt that forest sometimes, but I don't go back to that spot. The trail cam's still out there somewhere, probably rotted by now. I thought about retrieving it once, but the idea of standing in that clearing again makes my skin crawl. Not from fear exactly. More like the feeling that whatever happened wasn't done by accident. Like it was arranged, or watched. I've never seen another animal do that since. Not one. I'd set up my gear behind the old high school baseball field around 9:15 that night. It's the only spot near town that doesn't get too much light pollution, and the janitor doesn't care if I park back there as long as I clean up after myself. This was in Maple Ridge, small town in central Ohio. Not much going on after dark. I've been into amateur astronomy since college, and most nights I just try to catch a few meteorites or track satellites as they pass over. I had my Celestron Nexstar out and synced, nothing fancy, just enough to spot Jupiter's moons or catch some of the brighter Messier objects. It was one of those crisp, totally clear October nights, mid-40s, no clouds, and just the faintest wind coming in from the west. About 40 minutes in, I noticed a formation of lights coming in from the northeast, maybe 30 degrees above the horizon. I figured it was a group of military planes doing a night run. We're not far from Wright-Patterson, and once in a while they do exercises out here. There were 6 lights in total arranged in a V, like geese. Same brightness, spaced pretty evenly. They were white, not flashing, except 5 of them were blinking like normal aircraft. The 6th one, back right of the V, just stayed solid. No blink. That's what got my attention. They were coming in fast, but not silent. I could hear a low, distant hum, like a bunch of engines running together. Pretty standard, except that one unblinking light made no sound at all. I watched it for a while with my naked eye before checking my phone's flight radar app. Nothing listed in that direction. Not even the blinking ones showed up. That was odd, but not impossible. Military aircraft don't always show on civilian apps. I zoomed in on the formation with the telescope. The 5 blinking lights all showed faint outlines, wings, tail fins, heat shimmer behind them. Definitely jets. Probably F-16s or something like that. But the 6th one, it was just a light. No structure, just a perfect sphere of white, about the same size as the others visually. But it didn't distort or flicker. It didn't reflect light either. It was light. That was the first time I felt something was really off. I watched it a while longer and noticed it wasn't keeping perfect formation. It drifted a little, not lagging or speeding up, just sort of sliding sideways, slowly, against the wind. The rest of the group stayed tight. This one veered off about 5 degrees to the right, then corrected, then drifted again. And still, no blinking, no sound, no signal on the tracker. They flew over me at what I'd guess was 20,000 feet, maybe less. The jets rumbled low across the sky and eventually faded west. But the unblinking light didn't follow them. It stopped, right over the field. The other 5 kept going in perfect V, like it was never part of them to begin with. They didn't adjust, didn't loop back, just kept going until they vanished behind the tree line. The light hovered, dead still. I locked the telescope on it. Still just a bright sphere, pure white, no outline, no shadow. It didn't waver like stars do when they shimmer in the atmosphere. This thing was solid and unmoving, and again, not a sound. I watched it for maybe a full minute. Then it moved, straight up, no arc. No acceleration, just an immediate vertical climb. It was like watching a cursor on a screen being dragged upward, perfectly smooth. It rose until it was about twice the height it had been. Then it stopped again. I started shaking a little, not panicking, just that feeling when something doesn't match anything you've seen before. I've tracked satellites, watched the ISS pass over 100 times. This wasn't that. I backed away from the telescope and just looked up with my eyes. The light was dimmer now, higher up, but still the same steady white. Then it blinked. Once. A full second of brightness, then gone. I waited. Nothing. Checked the sky again. The wind picked up a little, brushing the field with that dry leaf rustling sound. I realized I was holding my breath. Then it blinked again. Another second-long flash, a few degrees higher than before. I had the sense it was still climbing. But the weirdest part? There was no transition. One frame it was dark sky, the next a bright light, like a strobe but soft. No flare, no fade. After that, it didn't blink again. It was just gone. I packed up quick. I didn't even bother with the lens caps, just tossed everything into the back of the Jeep and left. When I got home, I checked the satellite logs. Nothing passed overhead in that window. No weather balloons scheduled, no NOTAMs posted for military flights in the area. I haven't told anyone in town. It's the kind of place where people still talk about who's buying what kind of lawnmower. I'm already the space guy. Don't need to be the crazy one too. But I go out less now. I used to set up 3 or 4 times a week, now maybe once or twice a month, and I don't look at flight formations the same way anymore. I was hiking alone one morning in late spring out near Black Canyon, which is a few hours west of Denver. It's not super remote, but it's definitely quiet and rugged enough that you don't see many people on weekday mornings. I was doing a loop trail that runs along the bottom of the canyon, following the creek for a while, then climbing up to some overlook points before heading back. The day started normal. Overcast sky, cool air, damp smell from the creek. I'd been out maybe an hour, just pacing myself, watching the trail, listening for birds and the rush of water. It's the kind of place where you expect to hear things. Birds chirping, bugs buzzing, the wind rustling through the scrub. But after maybe 20 minutes, I noticed something weird. My footsteps, the crunch of my boots on gravel and dry leaves, sounded wrong. Not quiet exactly, but like they weren't carrying at all. I stopped and looked around. Usually the canyon walls bounce sound back so that even a soft step echoes. But this time there was nothing. No echo, just dead silence. I lifted a rock with my trekking pole, let it drop to the ground. No sound, not even a faint tap. I blinked, thinking maybe my ears were blocked or I was imagining it. I tried clapping my hands, cupped over my ears. The sound was muted, like underwater, not muffled or distant, but like the whole world had turned down its volume. I took a deep breath and noticed even my own breathing sounded weird, like the air was thicker or my ears weren't registering it properly. It was quieter and dull, like breathing through a scarf, but I had nothing over my face. Then I realized the birds overhead were circling, but silent. I looked up and saw at least 4 or 5 of them, big black ravens, usually loud and cawing, just gliding on the wind with no sound. They weren't startled or reacting to me, just circling like statues in the sky. The wind wasn't blowing much, but the trees were perfectly still, no rustle, no creak. Even the creek's running water sounded like a faint murmur, barely there, like the whole canyon was in a kind of soundless bubble. I stopped walking and just stood there for a minute, trying to process what was going on. It was eerie. Not the creepy kind, just wrong. I took a few more steps forward, testing it. No echo, no footsteps, no real sound at all from anything around me. It felt like the world had paused, like I'd fallen into some quiet dream. After maybe 10 minutes of this, I started to feel a bit uneasy. I turned around slowly, scanning the cliffs and trees. No movement except the birds, still gliding silently. No people, no animals. Just me. Then I bent down to examine the trail where the gravel met dirt. I was looking at a patch of loose stones when my foot caught on a root hidden under the leaves. I tripped and fell forward, scraping my right knee against a jagged rock. As soon as I hit the ground, everything came rushing back at once. The sharp pain, the sound of my scrape against the rock, my quick breath, the distant caw of a raven finally breaking the silence. It was like someone hit a switch. Suddenly I could hear the wind again, the creek babbling louder, leaves rustling. The birds took off, calling to each other, their caws echoing against the cliffs. I sat there for a minute, stunned. My knee was bleeding and stinging, but the noise was overwhelming after that silence. It felt like the world was breathing again. I stood up slowly and rubbed at my knee, still looking around. Everything seemed normal, except the weird silence from before. I tried walking back toward the trailhead. My steps sounded fine, echoing off the canyon walls like they always had. The birds were noisy and active again, like nothing had happened. But that silence stayed with me, like a thin shadow under the usual sounds. I kept thinking about it on the way home. No echo, no footsteps, no breathing sound. Silent birds circling but not making a peep. And then that sudden snap back to normal with my fall. I've hiked that canyon a few times since then. Nothing like that happened again. No weird silences. No mute birds. I don't know if it was something natural or something else. But for those 15 minutes, the world was quiet in a way I can't explain. It was like the canyon was holding its breath, and then it let go. I was up late one Friday night, just like any other weekend during college, trying to get away from the dorm noise. My name's Emily, and I was studying astrophysics at a state university out in the middle of nowhere. Well, as far from city lights as you could get in Indiana, anyway. The campus was small, and the best place to see the night sky was right behind the science building. There was this little hill with a few picnic tables. Nothing fancy, but it was quiet and dark enough to actually see stars. That night, the sky was crystal clear. No clouds, no moon, just a perfect starry black overhead. I'd brought my camera, just a decent DSLR, hoping to get some shots for a project, maybe catch some constellations or the Milky Way. I wasn't expecting anything weird, just wanted to take some pictures and relax for a bit. I set my camera on a tripod near one of the tables, adjusted the settings for long exposure, and started snapping shots. The stars looked amazing on the screen. I was trying to get a shot of Cassiopeia, that familiar W shape, and the stars were bright and sharp. After a few minutes, I checked one of the photos on the camera's display, zooming in to make sure the focus was right. That's when I saw it. Right in the middle of the frame, where the stars should have been, was this solid black oval shape. It wasn't blurry or fuzzy, like a smudge or dirt on the lens. It was like a perfect hole, completely blocking out a patch of stars behind it. The edges were smooth and clean, like someone had cut out a piece of the sky. I blinked and looked again. My heart skipped a beat because I couldn't figure out how it could be there. I took the camera from the tripod and wiped the lens carefully with my shirt. Nothing. The lens was clean. I took another shot from the exact same spot, maybe 30 seconds later, and the oval was gone. The stars were all there, twinkling like they should. I took a few more photos around the same spot. Nothing unusual, just stars. The black shape didn't appear again. I even moved the camera a little, changed angles, hoping to catch it again, but it never came back. I started getting cold, so I packed up my stuff and started walking back to the dorm. That's when things got weirder. The walk back was only a few minutes, but I had this creeping feeling like something was watching me. I kept glancing over my shoulder but saw nothing. The campus was quiet, lights off in most buildings, and the path was empty. No one was around. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just the dark or my imagination. But as I got closer to my dorm, the feeling didn't go away. It was like a weight pressing on my chest, a silence so thick it felt unnatural. Back in my room, I downloaded the photos to my laptop and looked at them again on the big screen. The black oval was unmistakable. I zoomed in, checked the metadata, and even ran the files through editing software looking for glitches or anything unusual. Nothing. The image was clean, no signs of tampering or digital error. I showed the photos to a couple of friends who were into astronomy. They were puzzled, but said maybe it was just a weird lens flare or a defect. But it didn't behave like any flare I'd seen. No glow, no color, just an absence. The next day I went back to the hill, hoping to see it again, but the sky was hazy and cloudy. I waited for several nights afterward, but the sky wasn't clear enough to try again. Sometimes when I'm out late or look up at a clear sky, I wonder if that patch of stars was really missing. Like something was there, something blocking the stars but not visible in any usual way. It wasn't a star, planet, or cloud. It was more like a shadow, but in the sky, where shadows shouldn't be. I don't know what it was. I don't think I'll ever see it again. But that photo, I keep it saved just in case. It's the strangest thing I've ever captured, and I'm still trying to figure out what I was actually looking at that night. I was working the night shift at the old office building downtown, just a security guard, nothing fancy. My name's Mark. It was late spring, around May, and I remember it was one of those nights where the air feels heavy and still, like it's waiting for something. The kind of night that makes you notice every little noise, even the ones that aren't really there. I'd been on the roof a couple of times that evening, doing my rounds. The building's pretty old, with a flat roof and some old satellite dishes, nothing too interesting. Across the street was an older brick building that was mostly empty these days, just a couple of small businesses, I think. Usually at night, there's nothing on that roof but some broken HVC units and trash. Around midnight, while I was patrolling near the south windows, I looked out and saw something on that roof across the street. At first, I thought it was just some old equipment or maybe a statue someone put there for some reason. But as I focused, I realized it was a shape, tall, upright, but kind of featureless. It wasn't moving at all. No arms, no legs I could really make out. Just a dark, solid silhouette standing straight up. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was tired or it was a trick of the light, but it was still there, exactly the same. I called into my radio just to check in with dispatch, and when I glanced back, it was still standing. I kept watching for a while. At first, I thought it might be some kind of prank, like someone sneaking onto the roof and standing still. But the longer I looked, the more I realized it didn't seem human. No shifting weight, no blinking lights, no signs of breathing or movement at all. Just that shape, unmoving, against the faint city lights behind it. After about 20 minutes, I decided to tell the guy at dispatch. I described what I was seeing, but he said he didn't see anything on his end. The street was mostly empty, no reports of anything suspicious. I tried to shrug it off, thinking maybe it was some weird mannequin or a large statue I hadn't noticed before. But then, the strangest thing happened. My handheld radio started crackling softly, a barely audible noise at first. It sounded like breathing, low and quiet, almost like someone was right next to the mic. I twisted the volume knob, thinking it was interference or a loose connection. The noise didn't go away. I even switched channels, but the breathing sound followed me. Always faint. Never clear, but definitely there. I checked my radio battery. It was fine. I tried pressing the button to talk, but no one answered or even responded. Dispatch kept telling me they heard nothing on their side. For the next hour, I stayed on the floor near the windows, watching that shape across the street. It didn't move once. The breathing on the radio stayed, quiet and rhythmic, almost like a steady inhale and exhale. I tried to focus on the shape, thinking maybe it would blink or shift position, but it stayed perfectly still. Finally, I figured I had to check it out myself. I grabbed my radio and flashlight and headed up to our building's roof. The stairs creaked as I climbed, and I kept glancing back out toward the other roof. When I got to the roof, it was cold despite the warm night. I scanned the area carefully with my flashlight. No shape, no one, just the usual old rooftop stuff, vents, broken tiles, and a few empty beer cans, probably from some kids who sneaked up there during the day. I called dispatch again, told them I saw nothing. The breathing noise stopped immediately. The radio was quiet, just static now. I stayed on the roof for about 20 more minutes, shining the flashlight around, trying to find anything that might explain what I'd seen. Nothing. No footprints, no disturbances, nothing out of place. I headed back down, feeling a little on edge, but trying to stay calm. When I got back to the floor, I looked out the window again. The shape was gone. Just the empty roof, silent and dark. The rest of the night passed without anything else strange happening. I kept glancing at my radio, half expecting the breathing to start again, but it didn't. The next day, I asked around. No one else had seen anything weird. The building across the street was empty that night, and the tenants hadn't reported any intrusions. I don't know what that shape was, or why my radio acted the way it did. No one else heard the breathing. I thought maybe I was losing it, but I still think about it sometimes, the way it just stood there, watching, and the radio that wasn't really a radio anymore. I'm back on night shifts now. but I avoid looking out that window. Some nights, the silence feels too heavy, and the memory of that shape and the quiet breathing feels close again, like it's just waiting for me to notice. I was hiking alone on the Blue Ridge Trail late one September afternoon, just after lunch. It was one of those days where the air felt a little heavier than usual, humid, but with a cool breeze coming through the trees. I'd left my car at the trailhead around noon and had been walking steadily for about 2 hours. The forest was quiet except for birds and the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. I remember stopping at a small clearing to take a break and have some water. The spot was shaded by tall oaks, and the sun made dappled patterns on the ground. I sat down, leaned my back against a tree, and took a few sips from my water bottle. My backpack was beside me, resting on a patch of grass that looked soft and undisturbed. That's where the memory gets fuzzy. The next thing I knew, I was standing near the edge of the trail, about a quarter mile from the clearing. I looked at my watch, confused because the time didn't add up. It was almost an hour later than when I had sat down to rest. I had no idea what had happened during that time. I checked my phone to see if I'd missed any calls or messages, but there was nothing unusual. No dropped calls, no GPS locations that jumped ahead. I hadn't taken a picture or made a note. It was like I just lost that chunk of time. My heart started pounding when I realized I had no memory of walking from the clearing to that spot. I wasn't sure if I'd fallen asleep or if something else had happened. I decided to go back to the clearing to see if anything looked different. When I got there, my backpack wasn't where I remembered leaving it. It had been moved maybe 3 or 4 feet away, resting near a freshly crushed patch of grass. The ground looked flattened, like something heavy had been pressing down on it, but there were no footprints or signs of anyone else being there. I checked the grass carefully. No tire marks, no shoe prints, just the crushed vegetation. I felt a faint metallic smell in the air. It wasn't like the scent of rusty metal or anything sharp, but more like the smell of old machinery or electronics. Hard to describe, but definitely not a natural forest smell. I looked around, trying to figure out if there was a source for the smell, but all I saw were trees and underbrush. The woods were still quiet, too quiet maybe. I tried calling out, just in case someone was nearby, but there was no answer. I felt my skin crawl. I checked my backpack carefully. Nothing was missing. My phone, water, snacks, first aid kit, all exactly where I'd packed them. But the zipper was open, and the contents looked slightly disorganized, as if someone had rifled through it quickly, but then replaced everything. I sat down on the crushed grass patch, trying to think. Had I fallen? Hit my head? But there were no bruises or scrapes, nothing that would explain the memory loss. I decided to keep walking, heading back toward my car, but I stayed extra alert, eyes scanning the shadows. I felt like I was being watched, even though the forest looked empty. The sun started setting as I made my way down the trail. At one point, I thought I heard a low hum, like electricity, but when I stopped to listen, it vanished. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. When I got to my car, I locked the doors and sat inside for a long time before driving away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that empty clearing, the moved backpack, and the smell. I looked up the trail cameras in the area, but none were near the spot where I'd stopped. I checked online for reports of missing hikers or strange sightings, but found nothing. I went back the next weekend with a friend, retraced the trail to the clearing. The grass was flattened again, exactly where I'd seen it, but no backpack this time. I didn't bring my own backpack or anything else. I just wanted to see the place again. We didn't hear or see anything strange, but the feeling was still there, the heavy quiet, the metallic scent faint in the air. I'm not sure what happened that day. The time loss, the moved backpack, the smell. It doesn't make sense. I keep going back to the trail now, but I don't hike alone anymore. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can almost feel that heaviness again, like something was there watching. But I don't know what. I was driving through eastern Oregon late one Sunday afternoon, heading back home to Portland after visiting family out near Burns. The highway was mostly empty, just long stretches of 2 lanes cutting through dry sagebrush and rolling hills. It was the kind of landscape that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. I was on that road for hours, and the sun was starting to drop low when I noticed something behind me. At first, it was just a tiny speck in the rearview mirror, way out on the horizon. I thought it might be another car, but it didn't get any bigger or change shape. It just stayed there, hovering at the exact same distance behind me. No headlights, no movement forward or back, just stuck in place like it was waiting for me to notice it. The road was straight and empty, no places to pull off, so I kept watching it in the mirror. As I went on, it became clearer that it wasn't a car. The shape was too small and too precise, almost like a tiny helicopter or a drone. But there was no noise, no buzzing or whirring. The whole scene was silent. I tried not to freak out or think about it too much. I figured maybe it was a drone someone was testing out or a weird reflection on the glass, but the shape stayed perfectly still for miles. Every time I glanced back, it was exactly where it was before. I sped up and slowed down a bit, and it matched my pace, like never closing the distance. The whole time, I was alone on the road, or so I thought. Occasionally, a semi-truck would pass in the opposite lane, but none of the drivers seemed to notice anything unusual. No one else was looking back or waving or anything. After nearly an hour of this, I was running low on gas and saw a small station on the right side. I pulled in, hoping to shake whatever it was. The minute I came to a stop at the pump, I looked back through the windshield. The drone, or whatever it was gone. Just disappeared, like it vanished into thin air. I looked around at the few other people at the station. There was a guy pumping diesel into a truck, a couple inside the convenience store, but nobody seemed to have noticed or cared about anything out of the ordinary. I asked the cashier about drones or anything unusual in the area. He just shrugged and said the place was usually quiet, no reports of anything weird. I didn't mention what I saw. I stayed at the station maybe 10 minutes, refueled and grabbed a snack, then got back on the highway. I checked the rearview mirror the whole time. Nothing. No sign of it at all. I drove the rest of the way home with a knot in my stomach. I kept thinking about that silent drone, how it stayed back there perfectly still, following me for miles, then just vanished when I stopped. I never saw anything like it before or since. No buzzing, no lights, no sounds, just that tiny shape holding steady far behind me on an empty highway. And for the life of me, I still don't know why. I was on the 11:45 p.m. train from Chicago to Milwaukee, just the regular commuter train that most people take when they want to get home late or visit friends on weekends. I don't usually ride this late, but I had stayed late at the office catching up on some paperwork. The train car wasn't crowded, mostly quiet people trying to keep their eyes open or zoning out on their phones. I was in a window seat, looking out because it was a clear night and the stars were out, scattered across the sky like little pinpricks. The tracks run mostly parallel to some freight lines for part of the journey, and I remember the feeling of just zoning out, watching the darkness outside, the lights of distant towns flickering far away. The train was moving steadily, the rhythmic sound of wheels on rails doing that gentle clack, clack, clack. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed another train on the parallel track next to us. Usually, those freight trains are easy to spot because they're long, slow, and have lights on the engines, or little red blinking marker lights at the end of the cars. But this one was different. It was perfectly still. No engine lights, no blinking markers, no glow from inside. The entire train was dark. At first, I thought it was just stopped on a siding, but there wasn't any station or yard nearby where a train would just park overnight. I looked closer and noticed something strange about its windows. Instead of showing the usual dim interior or even reflecting the lights from our own train, the windows reflected a star field. Not just stars here and there, but a shifting, swirling patch of stars, like looking out at space itself. The stars weren't static either. They seemed to move and flicker slowly, as if the whole surface was alive or deep. I blinked a couple of times, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. I even tried shifting my seat a bit to get a different angle, but the reflections stayed the same. The train itself stayed absolutely still. No vibrations, no noise coming from it. It was like this giant black mirror standing next to us, showing a piece of the cosmos that shouldn't be there. I whispered something to the guy next to me who was half asleep, but he just muttered and turned away. Nobody else seemed to notice it, and the other passengers stayed glued to their screens or their books. I kept staring. The star field shifted slowly, like clouds drifting but made of light. There was no interior at all. No seats, no people, no faint glow from cell phones or reading lamps inside the cars. Just darkness filled with those twinkling stars. A few minutes passed. I tried to make sense of it, but I couldn't. I felt the train slowing down a bit as we approached a small station where a few lights flickered. Then, as if someone flipped a switch, the windows on that other train changed. The star field disappeared. The windows turned black, reflective like tinted glass, and suddenly, the whole train was gone. Just like that. I scanned the spot where it had been, empty track. I looked out again, hoping maybe I had imagined it, but no train was there anymore. I checked my watch. Only a minute or two had passed. I asked the conductor about it when I got off in Milwaukee, but he just smiled and said it was probably just a freight train parked somewhere we couldn't see from the platform. But I knew what I saw. I keep thinking about that night, how quiet everything was, how impossible it felt that a whole train could be there one moment and vanish the next. No one else seemed to notice. Maybe I was just tired and seeing things. But I don't think so. That star field in the windows, like a tiny window to somewhere else. I still wonder where that train came from or where it went. I was camping alone on the edge of a lake up in northern Minnesota, somewhere close to the Boundary Waters. I'd been out there a few times before, but this trip was supposed to be a quiet getaway. No distractions, just me, my gear, and the wilderness. I set up camp in a little clearing, maybe 50 yards from the water. The lake itself was calm that night, flat like glass, and the sky was mostly clear except for a thin layer of clouds drifting by. It was late fall, so the air was crisp, the kind of cold that makes your breath hang in the air like smoke. After dinner, I sat by the fire, staring at the lake, just letting the silence settle in. That's when I noticed the first flicker. It was faint, almost like a candle flame, but too high up and too steady to be from a campfire or a boat. I looked closer and saw a pattern of tiny lights hovering over the water, maybe 100 yards from shore. They were arranged in a perfect grid, like rows and columns, evenly spaced, but each light flickered independently, kind of like old bulbs on a string that were slowly dying. The weird part was the pattern wasn't fixed. The grid shifted very slowly, rearranging itself bit by bit over the course of an hour. It wasn't random, but it didn't form any clear shapes or letters either. Just this faint, steady glow that moved, stretched, then pulled back, always staying suspended silently over the lake. At first, I thought it was some kind of fishing equipment or maybe reflections from a distant marina, but the nearest marina was miles away and nothing around matched the regularity of the grid. I didn't hear any motors or noises, just the usual sounds of water lapping against the shore and the occasional call of a loon. I tried taking photos with my phone, but they all came out blurry or with weird static that wasn't there in real life. I reset the camera, checked the lens, but it was fine otherwise. I figured maybe the low light was messing with it. The light stayed like that for hours, shifting slowly, but never changing brightness or color. No flashes, no beams, just that faint pulsing glow. I kept watching, half expecting them to go away or change somehow, but they stayed calm and steady. Around 2 a.m., a thick fog rolled in from the lake, softening the edges of the lights until they became even more ghostly. The grid pattern blurred, the lights merging and separating as if they were underwater bubbles. I sat still, feeling a bit on edge, but not exactly scared, just confused. Then, right before dawn, the whole grid just vanished. No flicker, no fade out, nothing. It was like someone flipped a switch, and the lake was completely dark again. I stayed up for a while longer, trying to make sense of it, but nothing else happened. I didn't hear any strange sounds or see anything moving. Just the usual early morning noises, birds waking up, wind in the trees. The next day, I hiked around the shore, looking for anything unusual. No footprints, no equipment, no wires or structures that could explain the lights. The shoreline was undisturbed except for my own tracks. I packed up that afternoon and drove home, thinking about what I'd seen. I checked online, tried to find anything about strange lights in that area. Nothing came up. No reports of drones, fishermen, or light shows. I'm still not sure what those lights were. They didn't feel threatening or weird in a sci-fi way, just strange. Like something was watching or communicating silently, but not in a way I could understand. I've told a few friends, but mostly kept quiet. I guess it sounds crazy, but I know what I saw. That grid of flickering lights, drifting and changing over the lake and then disappearing before dawn. I was out hiking alone on a Sunday afternoon in early October. I like to get away from the city on weekends, and I had found this trail a few months earlier while browsing some old topo maps online. It was a backcountry route in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, not super popular or well marked, which was exactly why I wanted to try it. Quiet, fewer people, more nature. I started the hike around 2 p.m. The weather was cool but clear, typical fall day, some clouds but mostly sun. The trees were just starting to turn, reds and yellows mixed with the evergreens. I had my day pack with the usual: water, snacks, map, compass, and a phone with spotty reception. The trail itself was a narrow dirt path winding through the forest, marked occasionally with orange paint blazes on trees and a few weathered wooden signs nailed here and there. I'd been hiking for maybe 2 hours, enjoying the quiet and the crunch of leaves underfoot. The trail climbed steadily, but nothing too tough. I stopped for a break at a clearing with a small view of the valley below. I pulled out my map and checked where I was, figuring I was about halfway to the end. I put the map away, glanced up, and that's when things started feeling off. The trail markers I'd been following, the orange blazes on trees, were gone. Not just missing or faded, but completely gone. I looked around and couldn't find any trace of the dirt path either. The ground where I'd been walking was covered in leaves, but there were no footprints, no scuff marks, nothing disturbed. It was like the trail never existed. At first, I thought maybe I'd wandered off the trail without realizing it, but that didn't make sense. The path was obvious and narrow, and I'd been watching carefully. I stepped back and forth a few times, trying to find any sign of it, but there was nothing. Trees and underbrush all around, but no trail. Then I heard it, a low humming sound. It wasn't loud, more like a vibration in the air, almost beneath hearing, but definitely there. It felt like the kind of noise you get near heavy electrical equipment, but obviously there was nothing like that out here. The forest was silent except for that. I stood still for a few minutes, trying to listen, trying to make sense of what was happening. The humming seemed to pulse slightly, almost like a heartbeat or a slow engine idling. The longer I stood, the more uneasy I felt. My skin got goosebumps even though the air wasn't cold. Suddenly, like a switch flipped, the humming stopped. The trail reappeared. The orange blazes were back on the trees, the dirt path was clear, and the footprints I'd left earlier were visible again in the dirt. It was as if none of that had ever disappeared. I looked around to see if anything else had changed, but everything else looked the same. Trees, rocks, sky. I stood there for a minute, wondering if I had just imagined the whole thing. But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I kept hiking, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was different. The forest felt heavier somehow, like it was watching. The usual sounds, birds, wind in the leaves, were quieter. Even when I reached spots where I'd heard birds before, they were silent. When I got back to my car a few hours later, I checked the timestamps on the photos I'd taken on the trail. Nothing was missing, no weird gaps in time. But my watch was off by a few minutes, even though I hadn't touched it since leaving. I shrugged it off and drove home. I've been back on that trail a couple times since, but I haven't experienced anything like that again. Still, that moment when everything vanished and the humming filled the air, I can't explain it. I was driving home late one night on this back road that cuts through the farmlands outside of Albany, New York. I'd been at a friend's place a few towns over and didn't want to take the highway, so I took the longer way through the countryside. It was around midnight, the kind of quiet that makes you notice every little sound or movement. The road was narrow and mostly unlit except for the occasional farmhouse, so my headlights were the only real light source. And the sky was clear, but the air felt damp and cold, like it had just rained earlier. The fields on either side were empty now, nothing but the skeletal remains of last year's corn stalks. I'd been driving maybe 20 minutes when I hit this weird patch of fog. It was low, just hugging the ground, maybe a few feet thick, but it wasn't like the usual fog you see around here. This had a faint blue glow to it. I noticed it because it lit up the road just enough that the yellow lines looked a little electric under the light. I slowed down because it felt strange. The fog was so thick I could barely see beyond the edges of the road. The glow wasn't bright, but enough to make the whole thing feel unnatural. I turned on the radio, thinking maybe I could get some music or a late-night talk show to calm my nerves. But the moment I hit the fog, the radio went dead. Static at first, then nothing. Just silence. I glanced down at my dashboard. My headlights, too, seemed dimmer than usual. Not like they'd burned out or anything. The bulbs were fine. But they were noticeably less bright, like something was absorbing or blocking the light. The glow from the fog kind of overwhelmed them, and the road ahead looked more blue than white now. I kept driving, telling myself it was just a weird patch of fog and maybe my car's electronics were glitching. That happens sometimes, especially when you're in the middle of nowhere with spotty reception. The fog didn't last long, maybe a mile or so, but when I finally drove out of it, I looked back in the rearview mirror and noticed something strange on the road behind me. There were tire tracks in the dirt on the shoulder, but these tracks weren't there before I entered the fog. They looked fresh, as if a car had been driving right behind me, keeping pace the whole time. Except when I checked my mirrors, there was no other vehicle anywhere. I slowed down, trying to get a better look, but there was nothing behind me except the dark road and the faint outlines of fields. I thought maybe it was just a trick of the light or my imagination, so I kept driving, but the feeling didn't go away. After a few minutes, I turned onto a better lit highway and tried the radio again. It worked normally. Headlights were back to full brightness. I pulled over briefly to check my phone, which had been dead the whole drive, and it turned back on with a full battery, like it had been on, but frozen. I told myself maybe I'd do some research about that fog or the road later, but honestly, it felt like something you couldn't really explain. I got home safe, though. No damage to the car, no weird scratches or anything, just those tire tracks on the shoulder of the road, which I've never been able to explain. I was out for my usual late-night run one summer evening in the woods behind my neighborhood in upstate New York. I like running after dark sometimes. It's quieter, cooler, and less crowded. I know the trails well, or so I thought. The night was warm, humid even, with that thick feeling in the air you get before a storm, though the sky was mostly clear, just a few clouds drifting. I left my house around 11:30 p.m., jogging down the paved path that leads to the woods. The usual sounds were there. Crickets chirping, frogs croaking from the nearby pond, and a couple of dogs barking far off. The air smelled like wet earth and pine. I was running steady, headphones off to hear everything around me. About 10 minutes in, I reached this narrow stretch of trail that cuts through a denser patch of forest. It's a little overgrown and darker because the trees block out more light. I've run through here dozens of times, but this night something was off. As I stepped into that part of the woods, all the usual nighttime sounds stopped. No crickets, no frogs, no distant barking, just silence. Not like when sounds fade away gradually, but a sudden, absolute silence, like someone hit a mute button. I stopped and listened. Nothing. It was unnerving because the rest of the trail was still alive with noise, only this section was completely dead quiet. I glanced at my wristwatch, a basic digital one, nothing fancy, and noticed the second hand had stopped moving. I shook my arm, thinking it was just the angle or maybe the battery dying, but then I looked again a few minutes later. The watch was frozen at the exact same time, and my run timer had stopped counting. It stayed like that for about 5 minutes. I didn't notice the time passing until I looked down. I felt this strange pressure in the air, like it was thicker, heavier. My skin prickled, and I slowed to a walk. When I looked up through the trees at the edge of the clearing, I saw a faint, pale glow hovering just beyond the tree line. It wasn't bright enough to light anything up, just a soft, steady light that shifted gently, almost like it was breathing. It was too quiet and too still to be anything normal. I half expected a deer or some animal to step out, but nothing moved. No wind stirred the leaves or the grass. I felt stuck, like I didn't want to move closer, but also didn't want to turn back. After a minute or so, I took a small step forward, and the glow pulsed, dimming slightly, then brightening again. It wasn't blinking or flashing, just this slow, even pulse. The watch still didn't tick. I decided to back away and turn around. As soon as I stepped out of that stretch of woods, the sounds came rushing back. Crickets, frogs, dogs, everything returned at once, loud and sudden, like nothing had stopped. I looked down at my watch again, and the second hand jumped forward as if it had been frozen for 5 minutes. The timer on the watch started again, like nothing had happened. I ran back the rest of the way to my house, trying to shake off the feeling that something was watching me from the edge of the trees. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about the silence and the glow. The next day, I went back to the spot in daylight, looking for anything unusual, footprints, disturbed plants, anything that could explain it. But it looked normal. No marks, no trash, no lights. I've run that trail plenty of times since, but I avoid that particular stretch now, especially after dark. Every time I get close, I get that same prickly feeling like something's there just beyond the trees, waiting. I don't know what it was. It wasn't a flashlight or any kind of human light I could identify, and I'm certain it wasn't an animal. The silence and the watch stopping, that's the part I can't explain. I'm not sure I want to know what was out there, but I keep thinking about it when I'm alone at night, running or not. I was flying my little Cessna 172 back from a solo trip to a small airstrip near Lake Tahoe. The flight was smooth, weather was clear with just a few thin clouds drifting low on the horizon, and I had the whole cockpit to myself, which I liked. It was late afternoon, just turning into dusk, and the sky was this deepening blue, fading toward purple as the sun slipped behind the mountains. I was about 5,500 feet up, cruising along a route that was pretty familiar to me by now. The radio was quiet, except for a few calls from other pilots checking in and out with the nearest tower. I was chatting idly with the controller, giving position updates and altitude, nothing unusual. That's when I noticed it. At first, I thought it was another small plane crossing above me, maybe a little higher, but the way it moved didn't make sense. It was about a mile or so ahead, just a tiny dot against the fading light, but it was solid. No blinking lights or the usual navigation strobes. Just a shape, like a silhouette of an aircraft, but oddly featureless. I pointed my binoculars at it, trying to make out what kind of plane it was. No wings or tail were visible, just this smooth, dark outline. It didn't look like any aircraft I'd seen before, but I figured maybe the light was playing tricks on me. Then it did something I'd never seen in all my years flying. The object just rotated 90 degrees right there in the sky without banking or tilting like a plane normally would. It just spun like a flat shape on a turntable, and I could see the whole thing change its angle, perfectly horizontal to vertical, in an instant. There was no change in speed or altitude during the turn, just this crisp, unnatural pivot. I blinked, checked my instruments, and looked back out, but it hadn't moved forward, just rotated and stayed suspended in place. After a few seconds, it suddenly shot straight up, accelerating so fast it disappeared into the low clouds above before I could follow it. The whole thing happened in maybe 10 seconds, tops. I immediately tried calling the tower. Tower, this is Niner Charlie X-ray. Did you just pick up any traffic near my position at 5,500 feet? Negative, Niner Charlie X-ray. No other aircraft reported in your airspace or nearby on radar. I was quiet for a moment, heart pounding. It was surreal, like watching a glitch in reality or a trick of the light. But I knew what I'd seen. I kept looking around for anything else, but the sky was empty again. I didn't feel any turbulence or anything unusual in the plane. It flew perfectly smooth. I reported the sighting after landing, but the controllers told me there was no record of any plane or drone anywhere near me at that time. Even the radar data showed a clear sky. I still think about it sometimes when I'm up there alone. How something could be right there, moving in ways that don't make sense for any aircraft, and then vanish like that. No one else saw it, no one else heard it, and the official records say it never existed. But I know what I saw. I was camping alone on the edge of the Great Basin Desert out near the Nevada-Utah border. It was mid-September, clear sky and dry, cool air that got cold as soon as the sun went down. I'd driven out there to get away from the noise of the city and just stare up at the stars. I'm Jenna, by the way, and I've always been the kind of person who finds comfort in the quiet vastness of places like that. I set up camp just before sunset. The spot was perfect. A flat patch of sagebrush and dry grass with nothing but open sky all around. No streetlights, no houses, just endless darkness waiting to fall. I spent the evening sitting in a folding chair looking up, trying to spot constellations and satellites. The Milky Way was a bright, milky stretch right overhead. After a while, I laid down on my sleeping pad, eyes fixed on the sky, thinking about nothing in particular. The only sound was the occasional rustle of wind through the dry grass and the far-off call of coyotes. I don't know how long I'd been staring when I noticed it. This perfectly round circle of light glowing right on the ground around me. It wasn't like a flashlight beam or a campfire glow. It was this crisp white ring that looked like the grass itself was lit up from within. The circle was maybe 3 feet wide, like someone had drawn it carefully with a paintbrush. It wasn't cast by anything nearby. The moon was still low and behind a ridge, so no moonlight, no other light source that I could see. It was just there, glowing softly on the ground, no shadows, no flicker. The circle stayed lit for about 3 seconds. I blinked, and then it was gone, just normal dry grass under my feet. It wasn't like someone had turned off a light, it just disappeared. I sat up, confused. I looked around to see if maybe I was hallucinating or if there was a weird reflection or something. Nothing. The night was just as dark as before. The strangest part was how real it felt, like the light was actually touching me. When it disappeared, I could still feel this warm tingling on my skin, especially on my arms and face. It wasn't hot, but it was noticeable, like the skin had been under the sun for too long, even though I hadn't moved from that spot. I got up and walked around my camp, shining my flashlight on the ground, trying to find anything unusual. No scorch marks, no footprints, no signs of anything that might have made that light. I kept looking up at the sky, half expecting to see something, but all I saw were the usual stars. I decided to pack up and head back. The next morning, when I woke up, my skin was a little red. Not like a sunburn from the day before, but definitely a mild redness on my face and arms. I hadn't been in the sun much since setting up camp, and the air was cold overnight. I kept thinking about that circle of light, what it was, why it appeared, and why it made my skin feel like that. I haven't been back to that exact spot since. I'm not sure if I want to. I was driving home late one night, taking the back roads through the county like I usually do when I'm done working overtime. It was around 11:30, maybe closer to midnight, and the sky was clear with just a faint moon hanging over the trees. The air had that cool, crisp feeling you get in early October, the kind that makes your skin prick a little but doesn't quite need a jacket. The road was narrow and winding, lined with tall oaks and maples that were just starting to turn colors. There weren't any streetlights out there, never had been, and traffic was basically non-existent at that hour. I liked it that way. Peaceful, no distractions, just me and the hum of the car. I was halfway down a long stretch when I saw it, a fox standing right in the middle of my lane. It was still, just standing there, like it was waiting for me to get closer. The thing that really got me was how calm it was. No twitching ears, no flick of the tail, no sign it was about to run off. I've seen plenty of foxes on these roads before, usually darting away as soon as headlights catch them. But this one, nothing. I slowed down, eyeing it carefully. I didn't want to hit it, obviously, but it was just there. I figured maybe it was hurt or caught in the headlights, but even as I eased the car to a stop, it didn't move. The fox's eyes caught the light, shining a dull orange, but it didn't blink or shift. It was just frozen in place, staring straight ahead. That's when the radio went nuts. 1 second it was on a country station, the next it was just loud, crackling static. The volume seemed to spike on its own, filling the car with white noise. I reached to turn it off, but the dial didn't respond, and the noise got louder, almost like it was pressing against my ears. I blinked, maybe for a second or two, I don't know exactly how long, and when I looked back up, the fox was gone. Just vanished. No rustle in the bushes, no darting into the undergrowth. It was like it blinked out with the static. I glanced in the rearview mirror, thinking maybe it ran off behind me, but the road was pitch black behind the car. The taillights weren't reflecting off anything, no signs of movement, no light from another vehicle. It was just endless darkness. The trees and roadside were swallowed by black like someone had pulled a curtain shut behind me. I tried the radio again. Dead silence, no static or stations, just nothing. I reached over to the window and rolled it down a little. The night air was cold, but nothing else seemed off. No strange smells, no sounds apart from the usual night insects and distant frogs. I sat there for a moment, heart beating faster than usual, but telling myself maybe I was just tired or the fox had slipped off into the woods. I started the car back up and pulled slowly forward. The road ahead was normal, trees, the soft curve of the asphalt, the yellow lines. But behind me, through the mirror, the darkness stayed. I couldn't see a single light or shadow, no other cars, no street lamps, just this empty black that seemed too thick, like it was swallowing everything whole. I kept driving, eyes flicking between the road and the mirror. The radio stayed dead, no static, no signal. It was like the world behind me had stopped existing for a moment. It took me a couple of miles before the blackness in the mirror started to fade, and the familiar outline of the road and trees came back. I blinked again, unsure if maybe I'd imagined it or if my mind was playing tricks in the dark. The fox never came back, and the rest of the drive home was uneventful. I didn't tell anyone right away. It sounded too strange, like something from a story rather than real life. But that night, every time I pass that stretch of road now, I find myself watching the lane a little more carefully, half expecting to see those still eyes again, waiting there in the dark. I was out in the field just after midnight, like I usually was this time of year. It was late September, cool but not cold, and the kind of night where the air feels thick with quiet. I'd been up checking the irrigation lines. Something had been off the past week, and I wanted to make sure nothing was leaking. The farm's been in my family for a long time, so I'm used to the night sounds out here, the occasional coyote howl, the rustle of leaves, things like that. That night, though, it was too quiet. I mean, really quiet. Not just the usual quiet where you can still hear the far-off road or a tractor idling somewhere, but like the world had pressed pause. I noticed that right away, but I figured maybe it was just me being tired. I was walking back toward the barn when I saw the lights. 3 of them, just sitting there low in the field near the north end, about 150 yards from where I stood. They weren't moving, not blinking like a plane or anything. Just steady, pale blue-white glows, hovering maybe a foot or 2 off the ground. At first, I thought it might be flashlights or some kind of equipment left behind, but nothing out here should be left on like that. And I'd been out here all day. I grabbed my flashlight from the belt on my jeans and started walking toward them. Figured it was probably some poachers or kids messing around, maybe hunting rabbits or something illegal. I didn't want to call the sheriff if it was nothing. The closer I got, the more I noticed the lights didn't flicker or move at all. No sound, either. Normally, if someone's out in the field at night, you'd hear footsteps, maybe talking. A truck idling. Nothing. When I was about 20 feet from the lights, I stopped and swung my flashlight over them. The beam hit one of the lights, and just like that, the flashlight died. Clicked off and wouldn't come back on. I tried turning it off and on a few times, but nothing. I stood there, blinking, thinking maybe the batteries had just given out. I reached in my pocket for my phone. No signal out here, so I wasn't expecting much, but at least the light could help. The screen came on, dim, showing the time. I shined it at the lights again. That's when the lights lifted up. They moved straight up, smooth and silent, like someone was lifting 3 lanterns on strings, but without any jerks or wobbles. And then, just as fast as they'd moved up, they vanished. No trail, no glow fading out, just gone. I was standing there, flashlight dead, phone light the only thing in my hand, staring at the spot where the lights had been. The field was quiet again, but now that stillness felt heavier, almost like it was waiting. I tried calling out just to break the silence, but my voice sounded small, swallowed up by the dark. I walked back to the truck, trying to shake off the feeling that something was watching me. As I climbed in, I glanced back toward the field, but everything looked normal. Just rows of corn, tall and swaying in the night breeze. The truck started up fine, and the dashboard lights came on as usual. I looked down at my phone again. No signal, but the clock was right. I drove home slow, eyes flicking between the road and the dark fields on either side. Nothing else moved or showed any light. That's what happened. I've thought about it a lot since then, and sometimes I wonder if maybe I just got tired or stressed and imagined part of it, but the flashlight dying exactly as I got close, the lights lifting off on their own, that I can't explain. I've kept an eye out a few more nights since then, but nothing like that showed up again. Just the same quiet, normal fields. I don't really know what I saw, but it wasn't people. And it wasn't anything I've ever heard about before either. I was out on Horseshoe Lake just before 5 that morning. It's a small lake up near Iron River, Michigan. Quiet, lots of pines, decent for bass if you don't mind getting up early. It had rained overnight, so there was a layer of mist hanging low over the water, real still. One of those cold August mornings where you can see your breath, even though it'll be hot by noon. I'd driven up from Escanaba the night before, slept in the back of my truck. No one else was out there. It's not a popular lake, no launch ramp or anything, just a dirt path where you can drag a canoe in if you know where to look. I'd been fishing that lake for years. It's kind of my spot. I put in just as the sky was getting light, that pale blue-gray before the sun breaks the trees. Paddled out to the north end where the water gets shallow and the lily pads bunch up. Usually you'll get some action around sunrise. I'd been casting maybe 10, 15 minutes when I noticed this sound. Low, real low, like a distant transformer hum, but deeper. Not loud exactly, you didn't hear it so much as feel it in your chest. I thought it might be a plane at first, but it didn't fade in or out, just started and held steady. I paused and let my rod rest in the water, trying to place the direction. Didn't sound like it was coming across the lake, more like it was just everywhere. That's when I noticed the birds had stopped. Normally you'd hear loons or crows by then, but it was quiet. Not dead quiet, but just off. Even the water felt stiller than usual, like it had tension in it. I looked up toward the tree line behind me and saw it. It was maybe 100 yards inland, just above the pines. Perfectly black, like not dark gray, not shadowed, just black, like it sucked the light out of the air around it. Oval-shaped, sort of flattened, with no edges or seams I could see. It didn't move. No wobble, no rotation, no lights. It just hovered there, absolutely still, maybe 50 or 60 feet above the treetops. No wind came off it. The trees didn't sway, the fog didn't move, that hum kept going. Same tone, same volume. I sat there in my canoe, paddle resting across my knees, not sure what I was looking at. I had a phone in my tackle box, but I didn't reach for it. I don't know why. It just didn't seem like something I wanted to pull a phone out on. I must have sat there 5 minutes, maybe more. My watch said 5:19 when I first looked. It's an old field watch, analog, nothing fancy, just something I use to keep time when I'm out of signal range. When I looked again a while later, it still said 5:19. I tapped the glass, even wound it a bit, but nothing. I figured the battery had finally gone. It'd been running a little slow the past few weeks. The humming stopped just as sudden as it had started, like flipping off a switch. And the thing, the shape, it was just gone. Not moved, not flown off, just no longer there. One blink it was hovering, next blink it wasn't. I sat there for a long time after that. Didn't fish, didn't move. The air stayed weird for a while, like it hadn't caught up with itself yet. Eventually I paddled back in, packed up my gear slow, felt like waking up from something, but not quite. When I got back into Iron River, I stopped at a gas station for coffee and glanced at the wall clock. It said 7:42. I checked my watch again, still stuck on 5:19. I tapped it once more, and the second hand jumped forward like it had been stuck, and then started ticking again like normal. That was almost 3 years ago. The watch has worked fine since. I've been back to Horseshoe Lake maybe a dozen times since. Nothing like that has happened again, but I don't fish that north end anymore. I stay on the south side, even though it's not as good. Could just be in my head. Or maybe not. I just know the fish don't bite up there anymore. Not since that day. I was camped out near Coyote Wells, a few miles off the 98 on BLM land I'd been to a couple times before. Not much out there, but mesquite, ocotillo, and rock, flat desert in every direction with a few low hills off to the north. I liked it because it was quiet. No people, no lights, just my little tent, a cot, and the kind of stars you only see when you're hours from any city. That night was warm, but not bad. Mid-June. I had a folding chair and a cooler with a couple Modelos. Around 9:30, I turned off my headlamp and just leaned back to watch the sky. It was one of those perfectly still nights, no wind, not even a bug clicking around. I remember thinking how unusually quiet it was, even for the desert. About 20 minutes in, I noticed this one star, low in the southern sky, that looked a little off. Not brighter or dimmer than the others, just rhythmic. It blinked. Not twinkled. Blinked. On for exactly a second. Off for exactly a second. Over and over. At first, I figured it was a plane, but there were no other lights around it. No red strobes. No movement. Just that one light, flashing like a metronome. I watched it for a while, thinking maybe it was a satellite or something catching the sun weird, but it kept blinking like a signal. Then, without warning, it moved. It didn't arc like a plane or satellite. It didn't drift. It just shifted sharply to the left, maybe an inch or two across the sky from my point of view, and stopped dead. Same blinking pattern. 1 second on, 1 second off. I remember my heart rate picking up a little. I put my beer down and just stared. I didn't know what I was looking at, but something about the way it moved felt wrong. Not just fast, precise, mechanical. It sat there, blinking, and I noticed something else. Every time it blinked, I felt this tiny thump in the soles of my feet, like a distant drum beat, except there was no sound, just a vibration in the ground. At first I thought I imagined it, so I kicked off my sandals and put my bare feet flat on the dirt. The blinking continued, 1 second on, 1 second off, and with each flash I felt it again, a soft, deep vibration, no noise, no echo, just a pulse that came from nowhere. I checked my phone. No service out there, as expected. I opened the camera, but couldn't get it to focus on anything in the sky. It was too dark. I gave up and just watched. After maybe 2 minutes, it stopped blinking completely, just stayed dark. A few seconds later, it blinked once. Thump. Waited 3 seconds, then again. Blink. Thump. Then again. Blink. Thump. And then it vanished. Not dimmed, not drifted, gone. The whole sky looked normal again. Stars like they always are. Crickets started up behind me, and I realized they'd been silent the whole time. I hadn't even noticed. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the desert. Nothing else happened. I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, I walked out toward the direction I'd seen the blinking, probably a mile or so, and didn't find anything. No tracks, no burned brush, nothing out of the ordinary. I stood out there a while, letting the sun beat down on me, trying to shake the feeling that I'd missed something, like there'd been a message, and I just wasn't equipped to get it. I haven't been back to that spot since. My buddy Ray and I were parked out by Lake Blanche last August. We'd gone up there after work just to unwind a bit. It's one of those little mountain lakes tucked away up in the Wasatch, about an hour from Salt Lake. No boats, no cabins, just a hiking trail that leads you up to it. You get some peace out there. We packed a couple sandwiches, beers in the cooler, and hiked up around 6. Took our time. Sun was low by the time we got to the top, around 7:30. There's a little rocky ridge that slopes down to the west side of the lake. You can sit there and look right out over the water and watch the light fade off the trees. We didn't see anyone else up there, which wasn't too surprising on a weeknight. We ate, talked about work, nothing exciting. Around 8, the light really started to go, that purple tint the sky gets before the stars come out. We were just sitting there, not saying much anymore. Kind of that quiet you settle into when the temperature drops and everything goes still. I noticed the lake first. There were these little ripples near the center, not wind-driven, more like something had disturbed the surface, even though nothing had touched it. No fish jumping, no leaves falling, just this circular pulse that came and went, slow and wide. Ray saw it too. He leaned forward and said, "You see that?" I nodded, but we didn't move. I was trying to figure out what would cause that without any sound. The air was dead still, not even a breeze, and the ripples didn't look like they started from anything. It was like the water decided to move on its own. I was about to say maybe it was groundwater shifting underneath or something, when Ray said, "That's weird," and pointed out at the lake. I looked. He was staring at the stars, or the reflection of them, I should say. The sky had just gone dark enough for the stars to come out, and the lake was calm, so you could see them reflected almost perfectly. But what Ray was pointing at was off. The stars above us and the ones in the lake didn't match. Like you could pick out the Big Dipper overhead, plain as day, but in the water it wasn't there. Or it was just skewed, like a funhouse version. I stood up and stepped closer to the edge. The water was like glass now, except for the occasional wide ripple that would roll through like before. Then we both noticed the patch. Dead center of the lake, there was this part of the reflection where no stars showed at all, just a black shape. Not circular, kind of irregular, maybe like a stretched oval, but it wasn't a shadow from a tree or a cloud. There weren't any clouds. We looked up, expecting to see something blocking that part of the sky. There was nothing. No plane, no shape, not even a shift in the air. But in the lake, the patch was moving. Slowly, steadily, that starless spot drifted toward the far end of the lake. Just a subtle gliding motion, like an ink stain sliding under the surface. The stars around it shimmered like normal, but that spot remained flat, dull, like the water wasn't even catching light there. Ray said, real quiet, "That's not right." We both kept staring. I had this urge to pick up a rock and throw it, but something told me not to. Not in a dramatic way, just a pressure in the back of my head like I shouldn't mess with it. The patch kept moving. It didn't speed up or change shape, just slowly eased its way toward the eastern tree line until it passed out of the reflection entirely. And then the ripples stopped. The water went totally still again, and this weird silence settled in. Not just the absence of noise, but the kind of quiet that feels too complete. No insects, no wind, no distant rustle. Like someone had pressed mute on the whole mountain. Ray said, "Let's go." We packed up without talking, left the rest of the food, just grabbed our bags and started down. Normally, we'd take our time, use our headlamps once the light faded. It's a rocky trail and steep in places. But that night, we didn't stop. Didn't turn on the lamps either. Just walked in the dimming dusk until the trees swallowed the last of the sky. The whole way down, I kept glancing behind us. Never saw anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't alone. Ray didn't say a word until we got back to the car. When we hit the gravel lot at the base of the trail, he just exhaled and said, "Man." We got in, locked the doors, sat there for a second before either of us moved. The inside of the car felt too small, like the air was heavy. I turned the key, and the headlights flicked on. For a half second, they didn't catch anything, just black. Then the trees lit up like normal. Ray said, "You saw that too, right?" I just nodded. We didn't talk the whole drive back. Next morning, I checked a star map app, just curious. Compared what should have been overhead that night to what we saw. I still can't figure out how the reflection was that far off. It wasn't flipped, like you'd expect from a mirror image. It was like a whole different patch of sky was being shown in the lake. Haven't been back to Blanche since. Ray hasn't either, far as I know. I dropped my pack on a big flat rock at first light. The ridge across the canyon was still in shadow, but the peak ahead caught sun, glowing orange, so I raised my phone to record. My name's Mitch Larson, mid-30s, working in IT by day, hiking these parts near Big Bear Lake when I get the chance. This morning, though, didn't go as expected. Sunrise started normal. The sky faded from navy to pink, then blue, and I nudged the record button. In the viewfinder, I saw the ridge illuminate. Then I noticed movement, this enormous gray shape sliding low across the sunlit face of the ridge. Too slow to be cloud, too large. No outline, just a vast, washed-out shadow that stretched maybe half a mile wide as it glided down. It moved so slowly I thought my eyes were tricking me. Maybe I pressed record after the fact. But every second of video was just a bright shimmer, glare from the sun. Not a hint of a shadow. When I reviewed it, I saw no trace of anything odd, just lens glare dancing off the lens. That's when my back twinged. I shifted weight. The air felt thick, like dust. I looked down at my boots. They were covered in a fine gray powder, like the ash at a campsite after a wildfire. My socks, pant legs, even the rock had a thin crust of gray. But the last night I camped no fire, no smokestack, nothing nearby. I crouched to brush some off with my finger. It came away smeared in a foggy film, and I tasted it. Earthy, mineral, no sting. I rubbed it again, and the same, nothing clipped or burnt about it. I wondered if I'd walked through a pile of volcanic dust by mistake, but I wasn't that far east or west of any volcano. I stood and scanned the ridge again. No clouded past, no storm on the horizon. The shadow was gone. Sunlight bloomed across the mountainside evenly now, no interruption. Air felt steady. The wind was gentle, leaves whispering. I turned off the phone and stowed it. I wanted to sit more, but something pushed me up. I gripped the rock to stand, crunch of the obnoxious grit like sand in a tent zipper. My legs felt heavy, like I'd waded through mud, though my boots were dry beneath. Footholds were slick, dusty. I padded back to the trail and started down. The dust clung to my boots, had to brush it off when I stopped. At the trailhead around 8 a.m., I examined the soles. The tread was nearly filled with gray. I shook them hard, chunky bits flew off, powder clouded in the sun. I brushed the laces and the tongue too. No stain on my pants, but a faint dust line came peeling off the seams. I drove the forest road slowly. Trees arched over the asphalt, slow shadows flickered across my windshield. I kept reaching to wipe my boots on the mat, but more gathered under the seat and behind the pedal. At my cabin, I dumped the stuff. Everything, boots, socks, down jacket. I turned on the lights and checked the video again. Same glare, same ridge brightening. No wobble, no shadow at all. I spent the afternoon poring over maps of the ridge. No sinkholes, no satellite imagery showing cloud cover. I looked up volcanics, nothing suggestive. No volcanic ash fall that far inland. No dust storm advisories either. The next morning I hiked the same trail, looking for dust footprints or any ground disturbance. The clearing was clean. Lichen, dirt, pine needles, not a speck of gray. I scuffed around, raked pine needles, still nothing. But I found something else odd. A few feet off the trail, I noticed pockmarks in the soil. Too circular and regular to be rabbit holes, about a foot across, shallow. Gray powder lined them faintly. I poked at one with a stick, pulverized dust inside. I backed away fast. I left the trail and headed back. Air sounded louder. Wind in the pines, distant creek hum. I quickened my pace. Reached the ridgetop outlook I'd filmed from and looked across. Nothing out of place. I gathered my phone and backpack, shaking dust free. That gray crust stayed in the treads only. Nothing stuck to the rock itself or the log I sat on. Drive back was uneventful. I kept one boot outside the vehicle when I parked. I poured the dust into a plastic bag so I could look at it later. It looked like gray flour under the light, uniform grains. No color variation. I spread it on paper in my cabin and used a magnifier. Fine granular crystals, no insect parts, no mineral flecks, just gray powder. That night, sky was clear. I checked the stars, sun rises on the same ridge tomorrow. I'll record again to see if anything repeats. But I don't feel curious anymore. I feel cautious. Whenever I think back to that sliding shadow, massive and silent, my mind wants to fill a shape, but all I could ever see was a dark wash stamped on the ridge. And my boots will always crunch with that gray dust I can't explain. Name's Jake Mallory. I've been running snowmobiles across the tundra around Bethel for a good chunk of my life, hauling gear, checking traps, that sort of thing. Nothing fancy, just the usual work that keeps folks going through those long winters. I'm not one for stories or tall tale tales, but what happened last January still sits with me, and I've been trying to make sense of it ever since. It was a clear night, bone cold, probably 20 below. The kind where the stars burn sharp and the air snaps in your lungs like glass. I was coming back from a run near the Kuskokwim River, cutting across the flat tundra to shave off some time. The snow was hard-packed from the freeze, perfect for riding fast, and I was making good time under the glow of the moon. I'd been watching the sky a bit that night, more out of habit than anything. Up there, past the usual constellations, the stars looked endless. That's when I noticed something strange on the horizon. A cluster of lights, bright but not like any plane or helicopter I'd ever seen. They were blinking in a way that seemed deliberate, almost mechanical, and arranged in a precise shape, like a perfect triangle, but with smaller points inside, almost like a grid. I'm not good with geometry, but it was too perfect to be random. I slowed down to get a better look, heart thumping. The lights didn't move or make a sound, just hovered silently, steady as a rock against the cold night sky. The snowmobile's engine was the only noise, and even that felt distant, like the world had muffled everything else around me. I pulled my phone out, figuring I'd try to get a photo, not that I expected much in the dark with my old camera. As I aimed, the lights vanished in an instant. Just like that. No fade, no blink off, nothing. Gone. The sky was empty, just stars again. I sat there on the sled, blinking. No lights, no noise, nothing but the cold biting at my face and the wind whispering over the snow. Then I caught it, a faint smell, something sharp and electric, like ozone mixed with burnt wood or scorched earth. I looked around, but the ground was frozen solid, no scorch marks, no smoke, just the usual tundra. I didn't know what to make of it. The smell hung in the air for a moment, then faded with the wind. I started the snowmobile again and headed back slow, looking over my shoulder every now and then, half expecting to see those lights come back. They didn't. The next few days, I kept thinking about what I'd seen. When I told a couple of friends at the general store in Bethel, they laughed it off. Probably some military drills, one said. Another guessed it was just satellites or airplanes. Maybe. But none of that explained the smell or how fast the lights disappeared. No commercial planes fly slow and silent like that, especially not in that pattern. On my way out for another run a few nights later, I took a different route to check for any signs on the ground near where the lights had been. Snow was untouched, no tracks or burns. The only thing different was the way the air felt, thicker, heavier, like the cold had weight to it. I kept looking for any flicker or glow, but the sky was just normal stars and moonlight. That night, as I headed home, I noticed the radio on my sled was acting up, static popping in and out, cutting through my favorite station. At one point, I swear I heard a faint pulse, almost like a Morse code, but it didn't make any sense. I figured maybe the cold was messing with the electronics. After that, things got stranger. On a couple of rides, I'd get this feeling like I was being watched, not by people or animals, but something else. When I stopped to check the engine or tie down gear, I'd glance around, but nothing was there. Just the endless white tundra and the frozen horizon. One night, I caught a flicker of movement out there, just beyond the tree line where the river bends, a glint of light that wasn't fire or flashlight. It was like something reflecting the moon but moving too smoothly, almost floating. I tightened my jacket and kept going, heart in my throat. After that, I started carrying a little extra gear, a flare gun, a handheld GPS, even a small digital recorder, just in case. Nothing showed up on the recorder, though. No voices, no strange sounds, just my own breathing and the snowmobile's hum. Weeks passed with no new sightings. The weather turned warmer, the snow softened, and the tundra started to thaw. The weird smells and the humming vanished. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it gets out there. Still, sometimes when I'm alone out on the snow, especially on a quiet, clear night, I swear I see a flicker of blinking lights on the horizon. Never the same pattern twice, just a glimpse before they vanish. And sometimes that smell comes back on the wind, faint and electric. I don't know what it was or if anyone else will ever see it. But out there, under the endless Alaskan sky, some things don't quite fit the rules. And sometimes you catch a glimpse of them just before they disappear. I was chasing storms in western Kansas, about 15 miles outside Scott City, late May of last year. I've been doing this for about 8 seasons now, mostly solo. Sometimes I team up with other chasers if I run into people I know out on the plains. That day, I was on my own. It was one of those textbook setups. Dry line pushing east, plenty of sheer, Cape values through the roof, the kind of sky that starts off all flat and blue and by late afternoon turns into something alive. I'd been watching a cell build for an hour or so, parked on a dirt road with a wide view of the horizon. Around 5:40 p.m., the storm really got its act together. Classics, supercell, big inflow tail, rotation tightening. I got into position east of the wall cloud, maybe 2.5 miles out. Lightning was constant by then, but no rain yet, so visibility was still decent. I was filming from the back of the truck with my main camera on the tripod and a GoPro suctioned to the dash, running a time lapse. At 6:12, the funnel dropped. Thin at first, like a rope, but it widened fast. Touched down in an open field and kicked up dirt immediately. I kept recording, repositioned once to stay ahead of it, and managed to capture a full 3 minutes of the tornado at peak strength. It was during those 3 minutes that I saw something I still can't explain. The tornado had started to wrap in rain, but I could still make out the base. There was a flash, bright but not lightning. It came from inside the funnel, not a reflection or debris. It was metallic and it moved against the rotation of the wind just for a split second. A disc shape, I think. But it was gone almost immediately, like it folded into the cloud and vanished. I replayed the footage in the truck right after and caught the flash on video. Frame by frame, it looked like something solid, smooth, slightly tilted, only visible for about 4 frames, so maybe a quarter of a second. There was no noise, no weird pressure shift, no electrical interference, just the thing, whatever it was. I figured I'd dig into it back at the hotel. I was staying at a small place off US 83 in Oakley. Real basic, 1-story, concrete block rooms with rusted HVAC units and a lobby that smells like freezer burn. I'd stayed there before, and the guy at the front desk remembered me. He gave me the same room I always get, second from the end. By the time I got back, it was after 9. The storm had moved on. I grabbed fast food, showered, and started transferring files to my laptop. That's when I noticed something weird. The GoPro footage didn't copy over. The file was there, but when I clicked it, it said unsupported format. I'd never seen that error before. I rebooted, tried different software, same thing. The file size looked right, timestamp matched, but it wouldn't open. The main camera footage worked fine. I isolated the clip with the flash and the tornado and exported a slowed down version. I zoomed in, enhanced the contrast, all that. Whatever the object was, it had mass. You could see the wind pushing around it, like the funnel bent slightly as it passed through. I've watched hundreds of tornado clips, and I've never seen anything behave like that. I uploaded the clip to an external drive and unplugged everything for the night. I didn't post anything online yet. I figured I'd sit with it a bit. Around 1 to 10 a.m., there was a knock at my door. It wasn't loud, just 2 soft taps. Not the kind of knock you use when you need something. It sounded patient. I froze, looked through the peephole. 2 men, maybe late 30s or 40s, both wearing black suits. No luggage, no phones in hand. One taller than the other. The tall one had a hat, like a fedora, but not stylized. Just plain. Both had pale skin and were completely still. I didn't open the door. After about 20 seconds, the tall one spoke through the door. His voice was low, and he didn't raise it. He said, "Are you prepared to surrender the storm data? Not your data or your footage. The storm data. Like, it didn't belong to me." I didn't respond. Just stood there, heart thudding in my ears. The shorter one shifted his weight slightly, like he was about to speak, but didn't. Then they both turned and walked away. I watched them through the peephole until they were out of view, then flipped off the lights and sat on the bed for a while, trying to process it. I looked outside 10 minutes later. No sign of them. Parking lot was empty except for a pickup 2 doors down. No black car, no footprints on the walkway. Next morning, I checked my laptop. The file I'd exported was gone. Not deleted, just not there anymore. The folder I'd saved it in was empty, and when I searched for the file name, nothing came up. The drive hadn't been wiped, just that one clip missing. The external hard drive wouldn't mount. It spun up, then made a soft click and went silent. Dead. I had backups at home, on a desktop, but I didn't feel right until I got out of town. I skipped the next chase day and drove straight back to Lincoln. Weeks later, I tried again to pull the file from the memory card, and it was there. Just glitched, all green frames and scrambled audio. Whatever had been clear before was now unreadable. I've still got the rest of the tornado footage. Regular people see a tornado tear through a field, tear apart a fence, throw a grain bin. But I remember that half-second flash, that shape inside something it had no business being inside. And I remember those two men at my door asking for it like I'd stolen it from them. I was driving back from my cousin's place in Illinois around the middle of June. He lives out in Mattoon, and I'd taken a few days off work to help him tear down an old shed and move some junk off his property. Nothing exciting, just a hot, boring stretch of Midwest chores. I left late Sunday night because I wanted to beat the Monday traffic, and I've always liked driving at night. It was just after 11:30 p.m. When I hit that long stretch of farmland along Route 16 heading east. No towns for miles, just soy fields and a few broken down barns scattered along the road. You'd see a house light every now and then, but mostly it was pitch black except for my high beams. No moon that night, just a sky full of stars. My phone was on the seat next to me, playing old episodes of some comedy podcast I barely paid attention to. I had the windows cracked, letting the warm air in. Nothing weird at all. I was just cruising at about 55, trying to keep an eye out for deer. I passed a sign for a place called Shelbyville Road, then maybe 5 minutes later, everything died. Like everything. The dash lights went out. The engine cut. My headlights shut off completely. Even the glow of my phone screen vanished. At first, I thought I'd hit a bump or something had shorted, but the radio was dead. Interior lights, dead. The needles on the speedometer and fuel gauge dropped like the battery had been yanked out. And it was silent. No hum from the engine, no tires on the road, just the noise of the wind disappearing as the car rolled to a stop. I hit the brakes and the pedal was weird, soft, no resistance. I coasted over to the shoulder and just sat there. The only light came from the stars, and even that felt dimmer, like the sky had dulled somehow. I tried to turn the key again, and nothing. No click, no crank. I pushed the hazard button, but the dash didn't even blink. My wristwatch had stopped too, dead center between 11:36 and 11:37. I tapped the glass and listened, but it had gone silent. The weirdest part was how calm it felt. No panic, just confusion. I wasn't even scared yet. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, trying to figure out what could have caused everything to shut down at the same time. I remember wondering if I'd driven through a puddle or clipped a wire, but it hadn't rained in days. That's when the orange light showed up. It came from behind, maybe 100 feet up in the air. I didn't hear it at first. Just noticed a glow forming in the rearview mirror. Dull, orangey, almost the color of a street lamp through fog. I leaned forward, squinting, trying to place what it could be. No vehicle sound. No rumble. Just that low, warm light getting closer, slowly moving directly over my car. I stuck my head out the window to look up. It wasn't a beam. It wasn't flashing. It wasn't moving fast either, just drifting, steady. Like a cloud catching the sunset, except there was no sun. The shape of it was hard to describe. Not a perfect circle, more like a squashed oval, glowing from the underside. The color reminded me of old sodium lights at gas stations. Kind of brownish orange, almost sickly. It moved smooth as glass over the road. As it passed directly above me, I felt something in my chest. Not pain, just pressure. Like standing too close to a speaker with the bass turned up, except I couldn't hear anything. My ears popped like I was changing elevation. My teeth ached. Even the air felt thick, like I was breathing through a warm rag. And then it was gone. 10 seconds, maybe less. The light kept going east, never speeding up or slowing down. I leaned out the window as far as I could and watched it glide silently over the fields, then vanish behind a row of distant trees. Still no sound, not even a breeze. Right after it disappeared, my dash lights came on. No warning tones or error codes, just full power, like I'd turned the key myself. My headlights blinked back on. The phone screen lit up again, still playing the same podcast, frozen for a second before skipping ahead like it had lost connection. The engine started humming again, like nothing had happened. I looked down at my watch. The second hand ticked forward. 11:37. Everything was back. I sat there for a while before I started driving again. Maybe 5 or 10 minutes. I didn't feel right. Not sick, just disoriented. Like I'd just come out of anesthesia. I kept flexing my fingers on the steering wheel, making sure everything was moving okay. When I finally pulled back onto the road, the air felt cooler. The sky looked normal again. Stars were sharp, no more of that strange haze. I checked the radio, flipped through local stations. Nothing unusual, just static and country music. I passed 2 cars over the next hour, both coming from the other direction. I almost flagged the second one down just to ask if they'd seen anything, but I didn't. I made it home around 2:15 in the morning. My roommate, Darren, was asleep on the couch. I didn't mention anything to him. I went straight to my room, plugged my phone in, and stared at the screen until sunrise. I kept replaying the moment the light passed over, trying to remember the shape, the glow, the way it felt in my chest. Next morning, I checked the car for electrical issues. Nothing. Battery was fine, alternator tested normal, no blown fuses. I even took it into the shop 2 days later, just to be sure. They didn't find a thing. The only thing I noticed after the fact was the watch. It started losing time, just by a couple seconds each day. Then it stopped ticking altogether about a week later. I replaced the battery, still dead. I keep it in a drawer now, along with the shirt I wore that night. I haven't driven that stretch of Route 16 again. Not because I'm scared, just because I don't need to. Once was enough. I've been messing around with amateur radio for a few years now. It's mostly a hobby to kill time and sometimes catch odd noises or signals from far off places. Nothing fancy, just a basic HF rig setup in my little workshop in rural Vermont. I like the quiet here, good for tuning into faint stations and picking up static that city folks probably never hear. The night of what happened, it was late October, a dry, chilly evening, and the sky was clear with a thin crescent moon, the kind of night where everything feels a bit too still. I was sitting at my desk around 11 p.m., fiddling with my receiver, scanning through the bands. I don't have any fancy DSP filters or digital signal processing, just the old analog stuff I pieced together myself. I was aiming for something weird or interesting, the usual static, Morse code, maybe some distant broadcast. Usually it's just nonsense, random bursts of static or old weather reports. But then, out of nowhere, something caught my ear. It wasn't a voice or music, but a series of rhythmic clicks and static bursts, steady, like a pulse or a code. It came through on about 7.040 megahertz, one of the lower HF bands. I tuned in closer, turning the dial slowly. The clicks were perfectly spaced, like a metronome, ticking out a pattern. There was this underlying static tone, almost musical, but just beyond recognition. It didn't sound like any broadcast or ham call I'd ever heard. It was mechanical, but not random. I grabbed my little notebook and started jotting down the timing between clicks, about every 1.3 seconds. I ran the signal through my filters and headphone amplifier, trying to make sense of it. The clicks stayed steady, not shifting or breaking rhythm. I felt oddly drawn to it. I'd never caught something like this before. Then, just as I leaned forward to adjust the volume, my rig powered off abruptly. No warning, no static burst, just dead silence. The digital display went dark, all the knobs and meters stopped responding. I checked the power supply, all seemed fine. I unplugged and plugged everything back in. Nothing. The radio just wouldn't turn on. I thought maybe the power had tripped in the house, so I checked the breaker box. Everything was fine. I tried the rig again. Still dead. I glanced at my watch. It read exactly 11:17 p.m. I was confused, but figured I'd wait a bit before digging further. It was odd that the whole thing shut down right as that signal was playing. I didn't want to leave my setup unplugged for too long, though. I sat back, eyes flicking to the dark radio on the desk, feeling a mix of annoyance and curiosity. 15 minutes passed, and the rig still refused to start. Then I noticed something weird. The small analog clock on the wall, the one that ticks softly, had stopped moving. The second hand was frozen at 11:18 p.m. I blinked, shook my head, and nudged the clock. It started ticking again. I looked back at my watch. It was 11:20. But then I checked the rig again. At 11:30 exactly, without me touching anything, the radio suddenly powered back on. The screen lit up like nothing had happened. It went through its startup noises. I checked the time on the rig's internal clock. It was exactly 11:30 p.m., 13 minutes after it went dark. I leaned back, feeling that creeping sense of what just happened. I had no power issues in the house, and no one else had been near the gear. The radio didn't act like it had a blown fuse or a loose cable. Curious, I turned the dial back to 7.4 megahertz. Static. No clicks. I scanned up and down the band, trying to catch the rhythm again. Nothing. I tried to reboot a couple of times, and everything seemed normal. I figured I'd write down what happened and keep an ear out for that signal again. But the strange part wasn't over. The next night, same time, same frequency, I waited. Hours passed. No rhythmic clicks. Just usual static and occasional ham chatter. The night after, still nothing. A few nights later, I was back tuning at the same frequency, and this time I noticed something else. Very faint and far off, almost like a whisper layered beneath the static. A kind of low hum, almost a vibration you feel in your bones rather than hear clearly. I sat still, waiting for the clicks. They never came. I packed up and went inside. Days later, while talking to a friend who's also into radios, I asked if he'd ever heard anything like rhythmic clicks on those frequencies. He shrugged, said sometimes odd signals pop up from distant military or weather satellites, or sometimes just interference. But it didn't feel like interference to me. Too precise, too deliberate. Over the next couple weeks, my rig worked perfectly, no shutdowns. The clicks never came back. I checked the spot where I keep my setup for any signs of damage or tampering. Nothing. The whole thing felt off, like I'd stepped into a glitch of reality. I even double-checked the house wiring and electronics. Nothing wrong. I can't explain what that signal was or why my gear died right when I heard it. The 13-minute blackout on my radio's power supply lines up too neatly with the signal's disappearance to be coincidence. But I have no clue what connection there could be. I don't have the equipment to record or analyze it properly, and honestly, I'm hesitant to try tuning into that frequency again. Sometimes I think about those clicks, how deliberate they sounded, how the silence after felt heavy and deliberate. I keep wondering if that night something else was listening or maybe trying to reach out. But all I got was a rhythmic pulse, a dead rig, and 13 minutes where time seemed to hang in between signals and silence. The day had been a mess from the start, but I figured that was just part of chasing storms in Oklahoma. My name's Caleb, by the way. I'm not a professional meteorologist or anything fancy like that. I just love storms, the way they move and shape the sky, how unpredictable they are. It's something I've done for years, driving out to the plains with my camera and tripod, hoping to catch a good funnel or a really dramatic sky. That afternoon, the forecast looked promising. There was a strong cold front pushing through, and the clouds were piling up fast. By late afternoon, the whole sky had turned this angry slate gray. The wind had picked up, the kind that shakes the trees and makes your hair whip around your face. I was set up about 20 miles southwest of Tulsa, near a stretch of highway that cuts through open farmland. Perfect spot for clear views. I'd been filming for a couple of hours, getting shots of the rolling clouds, the darkening horizon, and some quick flashes of lightning in the distance. Nothing too dramatic yet, but the kind of buildup that makes you want to keep watching. Around 6:30 p.m., the wind shifted suddenly. The air got thick, almost electric. I was still outside, standing by my tripod, checking the camera settings when the clouds started to move in a way I hadn't seen before. It was like someone was pulling them apart, but unnaturally fast, like a curtain being yanked aside. At first, I thought maybe a gust of wind had pushed them. But this was different. The parting was too precise, too sharp, like the clouds were deliberately clearing a circle right above the field beside the highway. I raised my camera to get a closer look and started filming. Through the lens, I caught something that didn't make sense. Right in the middle of the gap in the clouds, there was this metallic glint, like a polished metal surface reflecting the last light of the sun. It wasn't moving, just hanging there in the sky. I zoomed in, trying to get a better shot. The shape was vague, more like a glimmer or a flash than a clear object, but it definitely wasn't a plane or a bird. There was no noise, no contrail, nothing that fit with any usual aircraft. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the clouds closed back over the circle, swallowing up the glint completely. I kept filming, but when I checked the footage later, The part of the video where the clouds parted was corrupted, just static and glitches on the screen, like the camera had malfunctioned exactly at that moment. I remember feeling really unsettled then. The weather turned worse fast after that. The wind got violent, rain started pouring sideways, and I packed up as quickly as I could. On the drive back home, the sky was dark and angry, but the strange moment stayed stuck in my head. The weird thing is, the rest of the footage is fine. The before and after are perfectly clear. Only that part, when the clouds opened and the metal shine showed, is just a broken mess. I ran all sorts of checks on the files and the camera, but nothing explains why it got corrupted right then. Later, I showed the clips to a few storm chaser friends and some people online who know their gear. Everyone was curious, but no one could offer a solid answer. No one saw anything in the sky that evening except me, and the radar showed no unusual blips or signals. I keep thinking about how calm the air felt right before the clouds split. Too calm, like the world paused for a second. And that glint. It wasn't moving, but it felt like it was watching me or waiting for something. I went back to that spot a few times since, hoping to see the same thing, or at least capture something similar, but nothing. Just regular storms and normal skies. I'm not sure what I caught on camera that day, or if it was even real. All I know is that for a few seconds, the sky did something that made no sense, and my footage refuses to show me what it was. The night was unusually still when I drove out to the old quarry on the edge of town. It was one of those places that had been shut down for years. No active mining, just a giant hole filled with water and surrounded by jagged rock faces, overgrown with weeds and trees. I'd heard stories about it growing up, local kids calling it haunted or cursed, but I mostly knew it as a good spot to get away from everything. Quiet, isolated. I wasn't looking for trouble. I'd been going through a rough patch, and the city felt suffocating, so I grabbed my camera and decided to spend the evening out there. It was late summer, around 11 p.m., with a sky so clear I could count the stars. The air smelled faintly of rain, like the weather had held off just long enough to let me get there. I parked near the rusted gate at the quarry's entrance and started walking down the dirt path that led to the edge of the pit. My footsteps kicked up dry leaves and small stones, but the rest of the park was silent except for the distant buzz of insects. The water in the quarry was still and dark, reflecting the moon like a giant mirror. That's when I noticed the lights. They were floating just above the quarry, lined up in a perfect row, maybe 8 or 9 of them. They weren't moving, just hovering there, glowing with a soft white-blue light that didn't flicker or change. The weirdest part was how perfectly straight they were, like someone had taken a ruler and placed them evenly across the sky. I raised my camera and took a few photos, trying to zoom in, but the lights stayed steady. No noise, no flashing, just a calm, quiet glow against the black sky. I felt a weird chill, but I wasn't scared. More curious than anything. After about 15 minutes, the lights started to fade, one by one, from left to right, until the whole row vanished. I stayed for a bit, hoping they'd come back, but the sky was empty again. I decided to head back to the car. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine. They started just a few feet off the path, leading away from the quarry into the woods. They were large, heavy prints, but oddly spaced, like the person who made them was moving slowly or carefully. I followed them for a little bit, but they disappeared near a fallen tree. No one was there. I shrugged it off and drove home, feeling a little shaken, but mostly just tired. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. Inside was a folded map of the quarry with the exact spot where the lights had been circled in red ink. There was no note, no signature. That afternoon, I went back to the quarry to see if anyone else was around. I parked near the gate again, and as I was gathering my things, 2 men appeared from the trees. They were both dressed in black suits, but the fabric looked strange, matte and almost too smooth, like something you'd see in a movie, not in real life. Their ties were perfectly knotted, their shoes spotless despite the dirt. They didn't introduce themselves. One of them held out a copy of the same map, neatly printed and folded. "Don't return," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but carried an edge I couldn't place. The other man didn't say a word. He just watched me with an unreadable expression. I asked why. They didn't answer, just repeated, "Don't return." I nodded, feeling like arguing would be pointless. They turned and walked back into the woods, leaving me standing there with the map in my hand, the afternoon sun casting long shadows over the empty quarry. I've kept the map since then. The spot's circled in red, but there's nothing marked on it except that. I haven't gone back, and I don't plan to. But sometimes, late at night, I think about those lights, how they hovered so perfectly in a straight line, and about those men in black who showed up like shadows. I don't know what it was or why they wanted me to stay away. All I know is that some things are better left alone.